Listen to this podcast, or I'll gut you.
Welcome back, Horror Hounds, to Ghostman and Rivera's Horror Show podcast.
I'm Mike Ghostman Pickle.
And I'm James Rivera. Today we are going to give you our top 12 favorite horror films of 2020. Mike and I's both respective lists. So you want to get started with your honorable mentions?
I went ahead and put them in order. I don't usually put them in order, but I had specific feelings about some of these. I'll go ahead and start with 22. When we do our top 12, if it's a movie that we've already discussed previously, we'll probably go over it a little faster. If you want to see in-depth discussions on anything that we discussed here that we don't get in depth with, then you can go back to our old podcast from earlier in the year and see those. So I'm going to start with 22. I can't believe how low this one is. Becky, it's at 22. At 21 is Run with Sarah Paulson. My number 20 is, I can't believe how low this one is too, You Should Have Left with Kevin Bacon. And my number 19 is Bloody Hell. I believe that's from New Zealand or something. 18 is One Bedroom. I thought for sure that one was going to end up in the top 12, but it's not. My number 17 is The Invisible Man. I still can't, at the beginning of the year when I saw Invisible Man, I thought that was going to be in my top 10, but so many great movies came out and knocked it out. Number 16, Possesor. I watched that twice to make sure that I was, make sure what my opinion was on it, and it's down at 16. It's still one of the tops of the year, but did not make my top 12. 15 was Freaky, the Freaky Friday takeoff horror, the kind of horror version of Freaky Friday with Vince Vaughn. The Rental, directed by Dave Franco, starring Alison Brie. That's number 14. And finally, my number 13, before we get into my top 12, my number 13 is Swallow.
Swallow. Interesting.
That's my 10 honorable mentions.
So I have some honorable mentions too. They're not in any specific order though. So Sputnik, which is an excellent creature feature. Host, wow, which I really, really liked quite a bit. Black Box, which is very impressive. It reminded me a little bit of Get Out, but kind of carves its own path. Run, which is excellent, and not for a few minor flaws, probably would have been in my top 10. Freaky, because I had a lot of fun with it. La Llorona, which was very impressive, but I did not love it as much as some other people did. His House, which another one that I really, really did like, but not as much as a lot of other people did. I noticed it tends to be in people's top 5, top 3. Sorry, I didn't make it for mine. Vivarium, it's another big kind of a mindfuck of a film. And this last one is going to upset Mr. Michael, Synchronic from Benson and Moorhead. I really enjoyed it. Not enough to make my top 12, but I thought it was an impressive film and very imaginative.
I'm upset with myself that it didn't even make my honorable mentions because I love those guys. But
and one last honorable mention, and Hag Harem. Excellent movie that borders on a masterpiece that goes on for too long and gets too caught up in its own plot twists. Could have been something great, but not quite there.
Yeah, that's one that I wasn't able to get to. Isn't it Indian?
It's an Indian film. It's almost 3 hours long, and I think it could have been trimmed by at least 30 minutes or something. So what's your number 12, Michael?
All right, my number 12 came along, and Swallow was actually in my top 12, and this one came along night before last and knocked it out of my top 12. This is Rent-A-Pal. It's written and directed by John Stevenson, and this is his first feature film, which is very impressive to me. It stars Will Wheaton, Brian Landis Fulkins, and Amy Rutledge. It's set in 1990. It's about a 40-year-old lonely bachelor who takes care of his mom, who has dementia. He repeatedly tries a video dating service with no results, so he buys a Rent-A-Pal videotape that features a man, played by Will Wheaton, pretending to be his friend. By the time he gets a match from the dating service, he might already be too deep into his delusions to ever return. This one, I was riveted from the beginning. And for me, you know, there are horror movies that show you that they're horror from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
There's strange story beats, creepy music, creepy atmosphere. There's a sense of dread. But here it has none of that. It's here the strangeness is so subtle, and it's not recognizable at all as a horror film through most of the runtime until the final act.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not mind that at all, because I was riveted by the story the whole time, and really following this guy's struggle as a single 40-year-old man living in his mom's basement. But I thought it had very unique atmosphere. It effortlessly builds dread, using nothing that typically builds dread. Everything that you would normally use, atmosphere, strange sequences, anything like that used to build dread is not here, but it still builds somehow. I can't quite put my finger on how the dread is building without any of that, but it does. It has a retro feel in the intro and outro only, but the rest of it is set in 1990, so it is a period piece, and it does feel retro, but only in the intro and outro. But in the middle, the story and the setting feels of the time without being nostalgic. I like that a lot too. Excellent performance by Kathleen Brady, who plays the mom. I don't know where they found this woman, but she felt like a mom. She was very original. It's not like a caricature of a mom. She felt like a mom with a history. A lot of extreme close-ups that added to the cinematic value of it, and a lot of close-ups inside the VCR as the tape was loading. I thought all those scenes were really effective. I like the color correction. It looks deliberately drab and gray, but it's also colorful with great detail too. Mm-hmm. It's almost like, it looks like the color correction looks like they just took it straight out of the camera and just fine-tuned it. And the descent in the descent into madness of this main character is slow, but the film doesn't move slow. Okay. We're engaged with the main character's story pretty damn far into his madness. I mean, even when we see him becoming mad, we still follow him. We still care about what happens to him, because we see just that it's almost a justified madness, the things that this guy has to go through. It's extremely unique moments with Will Wheaton on the videotape. Even though it's a repeating videotape that's the same thing every time, he still feels like a character. He still feels unpredictable. And how they made him feel unpredictable when he's a character on a tape, I don't know. But it's
really quick, you said that it doesn't feel like horror for much of its runtime. So I'm going to ask you this, because I know how we both think when we form our horror list. If it had more horror, would you put it higher?
Probably, yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify. All right.
Just the quality and how riveted I was by the story, it would have been higher if it had more horror in it. But when the horror comes into play, it's definitely highly effective. Okay. But when we're watching this tape, we're like, you question yourself throughout. You question what you're seeing, and you question what you're being shown. Are we being shown what's on that videotape, or are we being shown his delusions? So you like, is it a strange tape, or is it the character reading into it? The moments are somehow scary, comedic, strange, and you never know which one it will be. Mm-hmm. You're inside the main character's head the whole time, so we're viewing the videotape in the same warped way he is.
So what you're viewing isn't always necessarily what's actually happening. It's more of the audience is more supposed to through somebody's mind, or looking at it through somebody else's perception, not necessarily an objective point of view then.
Well, I took it that it was a repeating videotape, but it's the strategic times when the videotape would show itself. Like sometimes he would like accidentally hit the remote and it would play, and it would be on a strategic point where it looked like the character on the TV was reacting to something in the room. Okay. So it's kind of manipulating your perceptions. So you're so invested that you feel frustrated for this main character, and
Mhm.
you feel empathy for him even when he's going crazy. And then it helps that you have details about his past and about his relationship with his mom are slowly revealed throughout the story. And then I thought it was really cool how he kind of it seems harmless when he's watching the tape at first, because it seems almost like he's practicing to be someone's friend.
Mhm.
So he casually plays the tape all the way through, and then when he plays it again, he knows the questions are going to be asked, so he rehearses like a cool sounding, like a cool laid back sounding answer. So he's kind of almost teaching himself to be cool. But then it turns sexual. It's a whole other strange thing. But there's like I mentioned the tape that seems like it's reacting to something in the room. There's one particular scene that's so effective. You see this frustration building up in him, and you kind of feel frustrated at the mom along with him, because she's kind of a dick to him, but she doesn't know she has dementia. So he yells at his mom really bad and makes her cry, and it's that silence, like he screams at his mom, and you're like, oh shit, that was me. He was just so mean to his mom. And then all of a sudden, in that silence, you hear Will Wheaton in the background. That is fucked up, and starts laughing.
All right.
So it's moments like that that really drive the narrative home. But there's a really cool scene late in the movie where he gets a date and he goes to the skating rink with her. It's so sweet and so romantic, and you feel so happy for this guy that I started getting scared at that moment.
Mhm.
Like, it was so weird that it was building throughout with no really sense of dread. But then the only time I started feeling fear for this guy is when I seen him happy. That's what the movie does to you. Like, you see him happy, like, oh shit, what's going to happen? And then I'm thinking through the whole thing, I'm thinking, how do you end a movie like this? And how did a first-time director do it so perfectly? It's such a perfect ending.
Okay.
So really effective, leaves you with a really cool feeling. You reflect on it quite a bit. It's a really cool cinematic experience for me, and not just as a horror film.
Okay. So, interesting choice. So I'm gonna start off my number 12 now. My number 12 is a movie that I'm sure is on your list as well. It's Color Out of Space from Richard Stanley. Now, I need to preface this with the information that's been released about Richard Stanley. He's obviously had a very embattled career. It's been very kind of controversial, being kicked off the island of Dr. Moreau and losing that film, and then coming back with this kind of like spectacular film. Spectre Vision has recently cut ties with him, Elijah Wood's studio production, because it's found out that he has a lot of allegations of horrific domestic violence from his partner, and this is going back to 2014. And it is very, very upsetting, and I'm still putting this movie on the list, but it's very, very upsetting that so many talented people cannot also just be decent people, and
Yeah.
it really sucks. I'll try to be objective as this movie as possible. Obviously, it still made my top 12. It's an adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's Color Out of Space, where in this movie a meteorite lands on Earth in a rural town, and it starts to take over a family led by Nicolas Cage. And what happens is so indescribably bizarre. It mixes, I'd say, elements of like psychedelic surreal horror along with very intense body horror. So some of the imagery in this movie is so jarring and so takes you to another level. I love the color correction behind it. I love the feeling that it gives you. And there's moments where bodies are starting to morph into each other that seem very uncomfortable, get under your skin quite a bit. And of course, at the center of it all, we have a wonderful Nicolas Cage doing his best Nicolas Cage. And kind of like Mandy, I felt like that the performance was very real and grounded, while at the same time being heightened and over the top the way that you expect a lot of kind of the way that Nicolas Cage has been caricatured. So he's believable as a family man who cares, but when it's time to up the ante a little bit, he fits right in with the bizarre atmosphere of the movie overall. So yeah, I really like Color Out of Space. We actually did discuss, this is one of the ones that we did have a discussion with earlier last year, film that I think we both really dug. I'm pretty sure we both really dug.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's why it's my number 12, Color Out of Space, Richard Stanley. And like I said, it's very unfortunate that things had to turn out the way they did.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and say that Color Out of Space is still in my top 12.
Yeah,
it's still in the original space it would have been, because when I first put my list together and I found out about Richard Stanley, my first instinct was just to take it off the list altogether. But it's such a fresh story, and I can't deny how the movie impacted me this year. So I had to add it. But just like you said, to preface where it's going to be on my list, I put it there in protest. That's where it originally was. That wouldn't be where it is now.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
But that was heartbreaking, because I felt that whole story, Richard Stanley, being blacklisted from Hollywood for so long and having all this passion and talent. And then he finally comes and redeems himself, and then... Yeah, it's too bad.
It is. So
that brings us to my number 11, which is another movie we discussed this year. It's Host, the pandemic movie that was made during the pandemic, that was a story very specific to the coronavirus pandemic, and it's a big reason why it was so successful, why it was so effective, because it dropped when we were all in the middle of this lockdown, so we could really feel the horror. And it's a whole Zoom call type of thing. We were all just getting used to interacting with each other on Zoom, and then this movie drops, and it's so timely that it couldn't help but be in my top 12.
I have a lot of admiration for that movie. It didn't make my top 12, but it's in my honorable mentions, just to be able to take advantage of a situation where, like, most filmmakers, I feel like a lot of filmmakers would have responded to this situation in a way that would have limited what they could have did. And it seems like with the filmmakers behind Host, they took full advantage of the situation. And I think the fact that most people are so accustomed to Zoom now and the way that it works and the features that are on it, the movie actually utilizes the technology of how Zoom works. And of course, having a supernatural story set in something so naturalistic that we're all using right now only helps to sell the supernatural elements even further. And it's a stroke of ingenuity. I gotta say, it's very impressive piece of improvised filmmaking for this era, something very timely for the pandemic.
Yeah, and it's another one like the Blair Witch Project, where a lot of the effectiveness of the film comes from the techniques that the filmmakers used to film it. Everybody was alone in their house. They maybe had one person to help them film, but they were all kind of separated. And then parts of the script were withheld from the cast to get genuine reactions, and the actors were allowed to improvise. So they were given the bare bones of a script and kind of allowed to improvise. So that's when the casting came into play. And another reason why it was so effective, the casting, you got Haley Bishop as Haley, Gemma Moore as Gemma, Emma Louise as Emma, Radina, they all had their own names, Radina Drandova, Caroline Ward, Salin Baxter, Ellen Emrys, and James Swanton as the Spirit. All of them came together in a perfect storm to make this crazy, weird little movie. Is so effective. I started out as a short film and expanded during production. I didn't feel that. I didn't feel that it was a overextended horror film. I thought it was a very well realized feature film.
Even as a feature film, it's already short though. It's not. It has a pretty brief runtime. As a feature film, it goes by like that.
Yeah, it doesn't linger at all. It kind of cuts right to the chase and cuts right to the little Zoom meeting that they have, and then the horror comes in pretty quickly. A lot of little inventive ideas to keep the story going, keep it interesting. A lot of really cool inventive scares using the technology and the things that were available to them to make fresh scares. And even the credits are on a laptop with someone scrolling through them. So it's another one, just a fully realized original experience that borrows from a couple other like found footage type of movies or laptop type of movies. But overall, I thought it was original presentation and pretty impressive for what it is.
Good choice. Good choice.
Anyway, that's Host, my number 11.
So my number 11 is Murder in the Woods. It's a movie that was made in 2017 but did not get its official release until this year. It is directed by Louis Ega. Louis Ega on the podcast along with the film screenwriter a little while back. We had a wonderful conversation about the movie. What I like about this is it's a throwback to 80s slashers but with a modern twist. It has a sense of fun about itself. It never takes itself too seriously. The cast is pretty charming. And unlike most slasher movies that we see of the era, the cast is not made up of all white people with a few token characters here and there. This is an all Latino cast, and I think everybody does well. Of course, they have the wonderful Danny Trejo here at the center of it all. Not at the center of it, but he plays a wonderful supporting part in this movie. I think it's one of those movies that's really fresh. It's fun. It's exciting. It moves by really quick. There's occasionally, I think some of the kills could have been slightly better, but when the kills are good, they get really inventive. And I'm thinking in particular of a scene that involves a bong. And I think you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So the interview we had was with Yelena De Leon, who's the screenwriter, and Luis Ega, who is the filmmaker behind it. Both Latinos working on this film. It was one of the few times in a horror movie where I felt like I knew the people in the cast or felt like they were people in my life. A little bit reminiscent, a little bit more closer to my world than a lot of slasher films are, and I really appreciated that. If you're interested in getting a little bit more information on this film, check out episode 83 of our podcast from last year. It's the Murder in the Woods interview. It is over an hour-long discussion with the filmmakers, and they tell wonderful stories about behind the scenes, about how they could cast Danny Trejo, Chelsea Rendon, Jose Julian. Really good movie, worth checking out. A lot of fun.
Nice. That was a good one.
Yes, I enjoyed it quite a bit. I feel like when we get to my top 10, it's going to get more controversial. But what were you going to say? I feel like I cut you off.
I like in Murder in the Woods how, like you said, the characters feel genuine and it feels like people that we know, but it doesn't sacrifice any of the campy fun of a slasher.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of the things I really enjoyed about it. It uses the cliches of the genre, but in a way that feels kind of fresh and funny.
Yeah, you filmmakers out there, this movie shows you that you don't have to have all these stereotypical throwaway characters that are fake and acting like assholes to have a good slasher film.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, that brings us to my number 10. This is one that was at the top of my list for pretty much the whole year, and it wasn't until we started packing all these 2020 horror films toward the end of the year that this started being pushed down. But my number 10 is The Hunt, directed by Craig Zobel, who did Compliance, American Gods, and Leftovers, and written by Nick Cuse from Watchmen, Maniac, and Leftovers, and Damon Lindelof from Watchmen, Leftovers, Lost, Prometheus, World War Z, and a bunch of other stuff. This is the one that was postponed. The release date was August 10th, but it was postponed because of back-to-back mass shootings at the time. This is when the world was crazy in a whole different way. Betty Gilpin from the show Glow, the Netflix show Glow, she really shines in this one. She really carries the movie well in an ensemble cast. She really shines among much more known actors and looks very good as the star, both physically and mentally and with her talent. And it's about 12 strangers who wake up in a clearing and realize they're being hunted. Pretty simple story. The writers mentioned that movies like Surviving the Game and Hard Target is what inspired them. So it's like it pits liberals against conservatives. You have a lot of the political humor, a lot of poking fun at both sides. I thought it was equally savage to both Republicans and Democrats, maybe a little more savage to Democrats. but I love the humor of it. Love Ike Barinholtz. It was a lot of fun, snappy dialogue, a gory variety of really effective kills. The tables get turned on the evil rich people, and it has this really explosive final fight between Betty Gilpin and Hilary Swank that you do not miss. Do not miss that part. So I love a great final fight and a big action-filled climax. And this one really brought mostly the action, but the horror came in just the brutality and the gore of it. So I really liked The Hunt.
That was actually, interestingly enough, that was the last film that we saw before the pandemic hit. It was like less than a week before the lockdown started that I think we went to go see it at the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood. So that was the last movie we saw. And we saw it with Damon Lindelof there giving a Q&A about the film. So that was a pretty cool experience as well.
Yeah.
I like the movie too, and I think it's a really exciting horror movie. The only reason this doesn't make my list, only because having been familiar with Damon Lindelof's work, and I got to meet him that night, which was awesome, but being very familiar, especially with shows like The Leftovers and what he did with Watchmen recently, this is a good movie, but it doesn't come close to the heights of what Damon Lindelof can actually achieve, like the true genius behind. And in all fairness, this is a short film. You can't really explore things to the same extent that you could over a miniseries or a 3-season television show. But I really enjoyed it. It's just, for me, for Damon Lindelof standards, it's not the height of his genius.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, because I think it's both clever and fun. Mm-hmm. But they kind of toned down the clever and toned up the fun.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of, like, when Damon Lindelof does shows like The Leftovers and Watchmen, he goes into such depth, and it's so not surface. I'm not saying that this is just surface level, but this is meant to be a little shinier fun. But he goes into such depth that I feel like this is kind of missing from his work. Regardless, I did enjoy it, though. I did enjoy them. Yeah. So we're probably going to get into some controversial choices. I feel like this is going to be the most different our lists have been in a while.
Oh, really? Okay.
I do. So I don't know how this would rank on your this one. So my number 10 is another slasher movie. It is Random Acts of Violence, directed by Jay Baruchel, who I knew mostly from This Is the End, where he plays himself, a very funny character, and from Tropic Thunder as well. We did have a conversation about this on the podcast last year, so if you want to go check out that episode where we discuss Random Acts of Violence in detail. But it's a flawed movie. It's not perfect, but the reason that this made it on the list for me is that a slasher film is some of the most ruthless, brutal slasher filmmaking I've seen in a very long time. There is one particular attack in here that is so visceral, so harsh, and so realistic, where a lot of, like, slasher films would play that scene and you would get great sense of gore and it would be kind of campy or fun or exciting. Here, it just seems really, really, really disturbing. There's somewhat of a critique of the slasher subgenre in here, and you may or may not find that pretentious, and if you did, I would totally understand why. But this seems to be deconstructing the slasher films more and trying to get to the horror of what a real slasher killer would be like. And of course, I like the performance I like the most in here is Jesse Williams as the lead character. He plays a comic book writer who creates a series of Slasher Man, where it's basically just a cliche of every, like, 80s slasher movie villain. And his art starts to come to life as people start to imitate what his artwork is in very grotesque fashion. There's a lot of interesting conversation, arguments between creators and people who think that certain creators go too far. A lot of brutality, interesting twist, a satisfying ending, and really good, colorful cinematography that reminds me a little bit of Dario Argento sometimes, if Dario Argento treated his violence a little bit more realistically, I guess. Jordana Brewster, Kathy, is another standout in this movie I really liked. I thought this was a very interesting, well thought out, brutal slasher movie that really I found immensely satisfying.
And wholly original, I think. I mean, it has you can see a few influences in there, but other than that, the whole atmosphere is really original.
Yeah. It deconstructs slashers, but not in the way that Scream does.
Yeah.
does some completely different thing with it.
It's very serious, but it never gets pretentious.
Mm-hmm. Although
I can see how some people might find it pretentious, though.
Yeah, I totally do. Look, I totally do, because I do get the attitude some people don't like to be lectured about, and I get that, because there are some movies where that bothers me, where I feel like that gets annoying. Like Funny Games is one of them, where I don't appreciate the filmmaker constantly talking to me. I'm like, you made this movie, and then you're gonna sit here and lecture me about what I'm watching, and you're so terrible for wanting to watch all this violence. That's why I don't really care for Funny Games, despite it being very effective. I find the attitude kind of smug. Here, I do get some sense of that, but I feel it's a little bit more reserved, and it actually tries harder at the slasher conventions. If you understand what I mean, it tries a little bit harder with the slasher conventions. It's not winking at you to the same extent.
Yeah, and the kills are a little bit more realistic and even more brutal than you usually see in a slasher film. That like they look painful.
Yeah,
And
and
you can feel them.
totally. And I had visceral reactions to several moments in the movie. Very visceral reactions to them.
Well, that's one. I mean, it didn't make my list. It didn't even make my honorable mentions. But that just shows how many films this year connected with me.
Mm-hmm.
That one didn't make it.
So let's hear, what do you got up next, Michael?
All right, my number 9 is a movie from Indonesia, Impetigore, written and directed by Joko Anwar, who wrote and directed Satan's Slaves a couple of years ago, another really good one. It stars Tara Basro, Marissa Anita, and Ario Bayu. The synopsis is Maya and her friend Dini travel to Maya's hometown where she is poised to inherit her rich family's estate. It soon becomes clear that the village is plagued by a terrible curse that is connected to Maya's family. For me, I was excited to see this one because I love Satan's Slaves.
Mm-hmm.
Not only was it really well-crafted horror film with some great scare sequences, it was also very foreign to me. Like, it's from Indonesia, so it's not only a foreign horror film, it's also a film that you're not used to seeing movies, country you're not supposed to be used to seeing movies from. So all the locations and everything look foreign. The way people act, it seems foreign. So it's very it adds a layer of interest
What makes
to the
it
story.
what makes it interesting, I'll get more into it later because I have it on my list higher, but what makes it interesting is that, like, we don't see very many movies from Indonesia. I feel like a lot of the imports that we get are like Asian films, like South Korea, more like South Korea or Japan or France or Italy or Germany even. We don't get too many films. But what I found very interesting is that it's a foreign land in a land that is foreign to me. So there's a double remove, because the area that the movie takes place in is this remote village where life doesn't really operate like it does in the rest of the country. It's a very different place, and it's very specific and isolated. And even if I didn't have that sense of like being in a strange land with unfamiliar territory, that layer would add it on there right on top of it.
Yeah, definitely. And this one is even more effective to me than Satan's Slaves was. I mean, it's expertly crafted and effective atmosphere and scares just like Satan's Slaves. But this one is a little more focused, I think, and the story is a little more layered too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's much more of a fable. Like you see it, it's a fully realized story that has history, and drama to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a great unfolding mystery, like the stuff with finding scrolls underneath their skin and stuff like that. So it's a great unfolding mystery. Amazing locations, like you said, and sets that look and feel completely different. I love the mixture of the jungle setting with the small city setting. That
Mm-hmm.
was really cool. And the main house was badass. I love the main house that she inherited. Just the whole design and everything, the feel of it was awesome. The violence is brutal, but it's also well choreographed just as much as the scares are. So if you're impressed with the scares on this, you'll be just as impressed with the violence because they both feel visceral.
Isn't it weird? This is, I think, very violent and visceral, but it never feels like exploitative. Like the violence and the horror, like a lot of horror, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, to be honest, that's why we love horror. Some of us are gore hounds, but there's something about the violence in this movie that doesn't feel like it's like exploiting the violence. It feels like it's very crucial to driving the story forward.
Yeah, violence is part of the story. It goes hand in hand with the scares.
Yeah,
it speaks to the desperation of the characters.
mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because of the curse. It also speaks to the ambiguity of who's right and who's wrong.
Mm-hmm. A lot of moral questions, a lot of back and forth moral arguments going in this movie, to the point where I still don't like the villains of this movie, to be very clear. But to a degree and to a certain extent, I understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, and have some sympathy while still thinking they are complete fucking monsters.
Yeah.
It was a very interesting dichotomy to have.
And it also says something that I like to see: an unexpected death early in the story of someone you don't expect to die so early. And it kind of just sets everything into motion and just like amps up the story tenfold in one moment. And it's also extremely
it was already feeling edgy and tense before we get to that point. So it just takes a feeling that kind of, I feel like it was driving home, and then just like really just snaps it in full force.
And the townspeople are not the villains in this. The villain is largely unseen. Mm-hmm. You hardly ever see any remnants of the villain at all. All you see is mostly what you see is the curse he left behind. Yeah. So it's excellent at showing that the townspeople are not the villains, but we see the consequences of what the evil has done to them. It almost makes them villains, except for that fucking old lady. That damn old lady pissed me off so much. But that's all I'm going to say. This old lady in the town, you will hate her.
Oh, yeah.
So on top of all this great stuff going on, you have this awesome little theater show that the village puts on. The villagers put on this little artistic kind of puppet theater show that's really original, kind of adds to the creepiness of the story. It adds a lot to it for me. I love the excellent way they tell the whole backstory, because you've already got a complex, layered story, and then you have one of those characters that comes in to explain the story further, and it doesn't feel like exposition. It doesn't feel like that character was dropped in there to tell you the story. You just kind of naturally, organically get this backstory, and we're filled in along with the main character. So we're finding out things as she does. So it feels very natural. And then another one with an excellent climax. And the climax is steeped in horror, but it's also intense drama and emotion. And then you get through the whole climax, and you have this cool little epilogue that pisses you off at the end, but it's still awesome. I love this movie. I can't believe that I liked it even more than Satan's Slaves. I thought I was just seeing another movie by this awesome director who did Satan's Slaves. I didn't realize he would really step up his game so much on this one. So that's why I loved Impetigore at my number 9.
I'll have more to say on that later. So the next one that I picked is actually one that I rewatched yesterday just to quantify my feelings about it again. And it actually was even much better on a second watch. It's Silhouette from Mitch McCloud. This is, how I would describe this, is like, it's an independent film, but it's lower budget than most independent films. But it's in the vein of something like Hereditary or The Witch. It's that slow burn art house horror where a lot of what makes this film effective is the drama at the center of it all. The drama is already uncomfortable. And I think any movie that starts off with very uncomfortable drama and very uncomfortable truths already starts off closer to horror than a lot of horror does. To add that layer on top of it only helps to drive it home further. I think it works as a drama because I think a lot of people could probably relate to this film in one way or another about, relationships, the people that you love, you start to grow apart from them and you start to resent them. Hopefully nobody in this movie, and hopefully not too many people have to go through what this couple goes through with cheating, a dead child, or the main couple, they're trying to recover from their daughter who passed away, and the husband who was cheating on his wife while she was at home taking care of her daughter. So there's a certain sense of guilt that drives the story, a certain sense of regret and mournfulness, and I think that the acting is really good, and I think that makes the horror scenes more effective when is the horror kind of spins out of, how do I put it? It spins out of the horror of their lives, because most of the horror in this movie is directly related to their drama. So it's driving home things that make people uncomfortable. The thought of having to be confronted with a dead child, the thought of having to be confronted with all these things that you don't want to deal with. And another thing that I found interesting about it was the lighting behind the lighting in the film has a very like drab, dry look to it for most of the film, for long periods of time. It kind of drives home the kind of feeling and the kind of relationship that the two main characters have. You don't get the sense that there's very much love there, that they're still trying to hold on to something that's just not there anymore, and their life feels a little bit, I don't know, drained of any excitement or joy or any pleasure. But that makes some of the later scenes more effective when the rooms get flooded with this crazy red neon light and all of these harsh colors that just kind of flood through these crazy filters. Makes the contrast between the drabness of their life and the intensity of the supernatural horror behind it. Overall, a really good movie. If you want to get a little bit more information on it, we interviewed Mitch McLeod on episode 84 of our podcast last year. So if you want to hear a little bit more insight into the filmmaking process, check out that interview.
And that's one of the many examples of Hereditary really opening up the floodgates on tragedy horror.
Yeah,
like horror that really explores tragedy.
Yeah,
and we've seen it throughout the horror genre through the years, but after Hereditary, there seems to be a lot more horror that explores tragedy like that, especially in a family.
And I think what makes I think that's scarier, because can you imagine going through such intense personal drama and loss and profound tragic loss to have aggressive, evil, supernatural forces piling on top of you in the midst of the worst moment of your life, when you're not even able to hold it together, almost like taking advantage of the weaknesses and how broken down you are as a person. So I think that's what makes like tragic horror stories like this really work really well. It's the idea of putting the viewers in a point where they could relate to. Anybody could relate to loss or tragedy, or even if you can't, you can only imagine how it would feel. So I think it's that relatability on top of the supernatural pressing on you that makes a lot of these films really effective.
Well, for me, Silhouette was a little hard to watch at first, because I had such a disconnect with the characters, because the true nature of their tragedy kind of unfolds with the story. So at first you just see these brooding, sad people just going through their drab, sad lives, and it's almost hard to watch. And you're like, until you start finding out why they're sad, and then it got to a point for me. It's one of those movies where like, all right, this better have a good payoff. This better be going somewhere, and then it does. So that payoff makes you kind of rethink what you watched before, and it's not as hard to watch as I originally thought it was.
That's why I was glad I saw it a second time, because it actually changed my perception, a lot of it. Knowing where a lot of it was heading, I understood that the emotional distance that you kind of feel between the main characters who are just trying to hold on to something that's not there anymore.
And let's face it, when somebody goes through a tragedy that intense, they become kind of unlikable. Like if you don't know what's wrong with them, they become an unlikable person who's not fun to be around. You know, yep. So it really explores that.
Yeah, to a great extent. So yeah, my number 9, Silhouette. Please check out episode 84, and you'll get a little bit more in-depth discussion on that film with the filmmaker himself, Mitch McLeod. It's available on IMDb TV. You'll have to watch it with ads, but the ads aren't too long.
Okay. So that brings us to my number 8. And my number 8 is another one that kind of explores grief, but in a different way. This one's an Amazon original, and I don't choose a whole lot of Amazon originals for my top 10 of any given year, but this one just completely blew me away. It's Black Box. I absolutely love this movie. I connected with it so hardcore. I had such a connection with it, I almost felt like I was mind melded with it. And it happened from the opening scene. I don't know what it was about that opening scene. I was immediately riveted, and it just grabbed me and kept me for the whole movie. So it's written and directed by Emmanuel Osai Kufor. Another one, highly impressive first feature film. How the hell do you make a film this good, this clever, and this competent on your first feature? I'm jealous. It's a black director who was raised in Texas by a family from Ghana. The Black Box stars Mamudao Ati. He was also in Underwater this year. This one's a much better movie than Underwater.
Oh, yeah.
I'm glad he got this one and not just Underwater. So let me try to say that name again. Mamudao Ati. Does that sound right?
That sounds about right. And of
Mamudao
course,
Ati.
we apologize for our American asses if we can't say things right.
And dude, watch this movie. This guy is so good. I felt for him so deeply. And then you got Felicia Rashad. I nerded out on seeing her in such a good horror film. I loved her in The Cosby Show growing up. She always felt like the ultimate mom. And then to see her in something like this, I nerded out, and boy, does she deliver. You got Amanda Christine, who plays the daughter. Everyone in Hollywood put Amanda Christine in a movie. This little girl has so much intelligence in her and so much gravitas in the way she carries herself. She's already an accomplished actress at such a young age. Everybody put this little girl in a movie. And then, of course, you have the very handsome Tosin Moranufola, who plays his friend, a doctor who's his friend. Very effective part of the story. The synopsis is: a single father, with the help of his little daughter, struggles to regain his memory after an accident leaves him with amnesia. He undergoes an experimental procedure in an attempt to regain what he lost, but as he probes deeper, the memories are too dark to be his own. This is another really good horror mystery. For me personally, it's some of the best horror mysteries I've ever seen in a long time. Came out this year, and this is one of them. It begins in the middle of the story. I love when a movie does that effectively. You know, sometimes, a movie begins in the middle of the story and you're lost for a while. Not this one. It begins in the middle of the story where the main character's daughter is helping her dad remember things. And it slowly unfolds from there, and it never stops unfolding the entire time. Literally every couple minutes, another layer of the story unfolds. And it's clear from the beginning that the daughter is in charge. Like I said, she has this really take charge personality. We feel like we know this guy, but we don't. We're looking at a guy who doesn't know who he is. He has memory loss through much of the runtime of the movie, so we don't even know the main character, but we do get to know him entirely from the people who love him. And I thought that was really effective.
The main character doesn't even know himself is another thing.
Yeah.
I also think what makes the mystery in a film like this work is that it doesn't feel like a mystery for a good chunk of its runtime until you realize that something's off. And the more it goes, the more interesting it gets. I really like this one. It almost made it to, like I said, I meant to put it in my honorable mentions. I think I'm the one who told you to watch this one. Almost made it, but I don't know. It just didn't make it. There's no particular reason. It was just hard for me to pick and sort through. But I really liked the lead performance, and I think that this guy is going to be a big. I think he has a lot of potential. I think he's charismatic. I think he's likable. You root for him through the entire runtime. The story has a layer of heartbreak to it as well, kind of like the movie I just discussed. I don't think it's quite as much about the tragedy, though it's definitely about that. This is more about unfolding a mystery and trying to figure things out. I like the use of the character that exists in the subconscious that feels like a twisted, deformed person. It's weird because that's kind of like a cliche that we see in a lot of horror movies, that bodies that are unnaturally twisted and that make weird sounds. But I think the way that this is used is a tad more original than how you're used to seeing it utilized.
Yeah, and there's actually another movie I'm going to get to later that has almost the exact type of thing, like a nightmarish figure coming toward you, crackling body, it's all contorted and coming toward you. So there's another movie that does that much more effectively than this one does, but it takes on a whole different connotation in this one.
Yeah.
And I like when Felicia Rashad enters the story, then you see the hypnosis. Hypnosis becomes part of the story, and that's the only part that felt vaguely reminiscent to Get Out to me, was the exploring the subconscious and going into hypnosis and going deeper and deeper.
It definitely some vibes of the Sunken Place in there. I could see some influence on Get Out on this movie. I could see like an influence there, but it takes it in a completely different direction, and it's not going for the same thing.
Yeah, and I love the rewinding and the fast forwarding of the memories through his watch. So he kind of turns his watch and he's kind of catapulted into the next memory. It's always interesting. It's strange and scary, but not a conventional scary. It's a scary in a your own mind attacking you kind of scary.
Mm-hmm.
And even the scares kind of evolve throughout the movie. They start out as conventional scares you've seen before, and then as layers get added to the story, layers get added to the scares too, and you get scared in a whole different way. And then and when we start to feel that something isn't right with the doctor, and that's when I started thinking that I was seeing flaws in the story, because I was like, this doctor's acting strange. Why is she doing everything herself? Why doesn't she have any assistance? But it all makes sense in the end. Mm-hmm. So, when you get to that part in the story, just wait. And then the story slowly becomes completely different than I thought it was going to be without even realizing it. It's such a seamless transition. It's not like the story goes along for a while, big twist, big revelation, and turns it on its head. No, it happens very naturally. And then for me, it's a high concept, somewhat similar to Possessor. This felt more like Possessor to me than it did Get Out, because of the high concept, because of the sci-fi. But I thought this had more life in it than Possessor. It had more soul in it, more emotion than Possessor, more riveting characters, character development. Possessor didn't have any of this for me. There's genuine people. They're real people. I thought it was more clever than Possessor. I thought it was more engaging, but it was less violent and less cinematic, but more intimate. So I saw parallels between these two movies, but I was so much more impressed with Black Box than I was Possessor.
I need to say something to that. I personally don't see any similarities between these movies at all. And as much as I like Black Box, I don't think it comes even in the same realm as what Possessor is going for. And I think the themes behind it are more unsettling and disturbing than the themes behind this one. This is about uncovering identity. Possessor, and I'll get to it later, is kind of does what a lot of the director Brandon Cronenberg, David Cronenberg's dad, does for the body. He does it for the mind, and I'll get to that later.
I can't discuss why it's a lot like it, because it involves the twist.
Mm-hmm.
After you see the twist in this, it's a lot like Possessor. You're putting one consciousness into the body of another, which is just like Possessor. But everything Possessor was going for, there was nothing emotional about it, nothing dramatic about it.
There's a lot of emotion and dramatic in that movie.
Nothing empathetic. I felt nothing for any of the characters, but very impressive movie. That's why it still made it into my honorable mentions. But I just seen this as something similar, but I liked that this one had a lot more emotion, a lot better characters. I don't Possessor, very impressive film. I loved it. I thought it was excellent, but the characters were shit. There weren't any good characters.
I disagree, and I don't think the themes of the movies are even remotely similar.
But what I just said, one consciousness being put into another, that's a similarity I'm talking
a
about.
very small part of what makes Possessor work as a film, or what it's going for.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That aspect was similar, but I'm saying the direction that this went in more of emotional direction, where Possessor went in a visceral direction. This is why I like this one more. I'm not saying this one's better than Possessor. I'm saying why it connected with me more, because I like connecting with the emotion better than the visceral aspects, because there was no characters that I cared about in Possessor, because there was no character development at all. We didn't know anybody in Possessor.
Okay, well, I'll get more later.
And in this one, I felt like I knew everybody intimately. Even the villains in this, I felt like I knew. And speaking of the emotion was really driven home in two particular scenes. I won't go into depth because it'll give too much away. But the phrase "Don't forget me," tore me up, dude. And then the handshake, where it's a big part of the story, where right from the beginning, the daughter tries to get the dad to do a handshake that only they know, and he's never able to do it. So that was a really added emotional layer to the story that was really effective for me. And this is another one, really satisfying climax. And the questions were answered in a way that blew my mind and kept me thinking about it the whole next day. So really effective climax to a very, what I thought was a very clever, emotional, and engaging movie. It's Black Box, Amazon original.
That little girl is also a highlight of the movie too.
Yeah.
Is a lot of the reason that when it gets to the and I don't want to say anything about the twist because I don't want to say too much, but there's an element about it that's heartbreaking when you realize it's a twist, and it wouldn't be nearly as heartbreaking if you didn't like the daughter as much as you did, or if you didn't feel for her as much. Like I said, I don't want to into it too much because it's better that you don't know what it is, but she's very crucial.
Yeah, it's the shift, shift in the dynamic between characters.
Yeah,
was really jarring.
All right, so here is my number 8 film, which surprised me because this is something that I was initially dismissive of when I read the concept of it, and when I read things about it, I was just like, doesn't seem like my kind of movie, but I'm going to give this a chance anyway. And it is Spree, starring Joe Keery from Stranger Things. And this is another thing I need to preface it. This movie affected me more because during the quarantine there was a couple of moments where there was a couple of phases where I went through where, you know, when you're stuck at home and you have more time to yourself, you start researching things and you start getting more into the internet and kind of getting into the dark side of the internet. I don't know if that's ever happened to you before.
Yeah.
So I started going through strangely, I just was curious about it, incel message boards, just to try to get a handle of how these people think and the things that they say, going into some of the more toxic areas of internet culture that are truly despicable and kind of horrifying. Do you remember the Elliot Rodger shooting? It was in 2014. It's when this young man shot up a bunch of people at a college, and largely it was because he couldn't get a date. He had angry motives, very misogynistic motives to his murder spree. And online in some message forums, he's kind of a hero, and people always ask who's going to be the next Elliot Rodger, who's going to do this. And then there's always articles written about people like this, and it always said something along the lines of, well, this is why we don't say this person's name, and then you end up saying it and drawing more attention to it. And this movie Spree is about a YouTuber, and I think some content creators could relate to it, who's struggling to get up his views. He can't get much of an audience until he decides to start killing the people in his rideshare. Now, just to be clear, it's based on Uber or Lyft or something like that. Spree is not an app that actually exists. They just use it for the purposes of the movie. And I don't imagine Uber or Lyft would want to associate with a movie like this because it would make people more paranoid to get in their vehicles. Then he starts killing people while he's on camera. He becomes gradually unhinged. And his performance really works for me. But what really sold the movie for me was the actress Sashir Zamata. She plays a comedian and a YouTube influencer, not a YouTube, but like an Instagram influencer who gets into his cab, and he's very dopey with her. He tries to like beg her for likes, tag me, you know what I mean, try to get more people to follow because she's kind of an Instagram celebrity. And she is one of the most fascinating, complex final girls that I've seen in a very long time. She's likable. She's easy to root for. She is right most of the time. But she's also a very flawed person in terms of how she takes advantage of the situation and manipulates her horrifying experience dealing with this kind of rideshare murder to her own benefit, and how she uses that kind of tragedy to exploit the advancement of her own career. Though to an extent, you're kind of empathetic to her, what she's doing, and you kind of feel like, you know what, after you've been through, you have a right to exploit that to try to get, I guess, a greater sense of fame. But it also makes her a little bit less of a clear-cut protagonist than most final girls are, that you question some of the unethical behavior that she does in the wake of her run-in with a spree killer. And the movie takes good advantage of the modern era, the type of technology we have, kind of similar to The Host taking advantage of Zoom. But this is how when you're uploading videos to Instagram or Facebook or something, how you get people following and commenting. And some people who follow and comment say awful, toxic, really terrible shit. They egg on the worst possible behavior, and you almost like a cesspool. This movie reflected everything that I felt going on to the darker parts of the web during the quarantine, the way that people are, the callousness, the attitude, the casual attitudes that people have towards murder, towards killers like this, incel culture, the way that people like this are idolized, the types of articles that were written about people like this is all tapped into a certain anxiety that I had during the quarantine when I searched the dark web, and this really taps into that. Interestingly enough, this movie is produced by Drake.
Oh, wow.
His favorite hip-hop artist. He's the producer on this. And Joe Keery, I believed him as an unhinged killer, and I was just surprised because I always just thought of him as the pretty boy on Stranger Things. I mean, he's good in that role, don't get me wrong, but I think this is a chance to show that he can do a little bit more than that. So overall, much to my surprise, I ended up enjoying Spree a lot. Though largely, I think it had to do with the frame of mind that I was in and the things that I've been exploring on the internet.
Well, I wanted to like it a lot more, and it seemed as it went along, it seemed like something that I was going to love. And the premise kind of reminded me of Tragedy Girls, which was about two high school girls who start brutally killing people for the sake of their Instagram following, trying to go viral. So this guy had the same motivation, but like with Tragedy Girls, you get this concept, and then the whole movie is kind of quirky. The whole movie is kind of off kilter. So the convoluted things that happen fits. The convoluted kind of goes along with the campiness of it. But with Spree, I thought it was going to be the same type of thing where it's steeped in realism, first of all. And that's what I wanted to see throughout the whole thing was realism. Like, all right, you got a great character as the killer. You got a good concept. You even come up with a lot of cool ideas in between as far as the kills and the character interaction and everything. But it's somewhere toward the middle, it started going off the rails, and it felt like it was going from point A to point B without earning it.
Oh, I could see that escalating. And like I said, this is a movie that I could totally see. It's not going to be for everybody. And I could even see people hating this movie. And I would even understand why people might strongly dislike it. And it does do that, but I guess it kind of worked for me because it felt realistic, but more of like a heightened version of that type of thing. Well, like I said, this is probably my iffiest pick. Not iffy, it's a personal decision. I stand by my choice by putting it number 8. But I know that people's patience are going to vary depending on the person who's watching it. It's definitely not going to appeal to every sensibility. And like I said, large parts of it I feel are because I was exploring a toxic part of internet subculture that I think this taps into.
Yeah, well, I ended up being unsatisfied with it by the end, but it hadn't not a whole lot to do with the movie itself.
Mm-hmm.
It had to do with the potential I thought it had, and for me, it didn't continue that realism that I wanted to see through the rest of it. So it kind of dampened my my opinion of it.
See,
but I enjoyed it.
The climax, as you said, isn't realistic. It kind of strains credibility. But what is realistic about it is how the things that people are typing. Well, because you see, since people are basically following the story and telling the killer, whose name is Kurt Kunkel, to do certain things, run her over, kill her, or when she gets the phone, do this to him, do that, take a picture with his dead body and stuff like that. So the heightened shit that was going on is definitely not realistic. I would never debate that, but I do think that the reactions and the way that people egg it on and kind of encourage it is realistic, if that makes sense.
That's one of the many things in there that showed me what a potential that the movie had. Mm-hmm. But it's definitely a fun movie with kinetic energy, dude, all the way through, especially with that main character. He's always peppy.
And he's kind of funny too in his awkwardness. And I think that's what makes it work for me. That I can again, it goes from point A to, I won't even say point B fast. It goes from point A to point Z, where it's believably psychotic, unhinged, to, whoa, this guy just completely went off the rails. But I think that the energy is so infectious that you don't really have much time to think about that until it's over.
Yeah.
I didn't, but yeah, that is a totally valid, that makes a lot of sense, actually. So I'm surprised that I enjoyed it as much as I did. Didn't seem like my kind of horror movie, and I liked it a lot.
And that was on Hulu, right?
Yeah, it's available on Hulu.
Yeah, that's a fun one for sure. My problems with it is just the consistency of the realism, but you can't deny it's fun.
Oh yeah, yeah, not consistent with the realism. Can't debate that.
So that brings us to my number 7, which is The Wretched from 2019. This is the one that was in drive-ins. This is one of the first horror movies to be released in drive-ins after the lockdown happened. Mm-hmm. And this caused an unprecedented thing to happen. This little indie movie became number 1 at the box office. Mm-hmm. Because people wanted to go to the drive-ins and see a horror movie. So it became number 1. So I thought it was a really cool story with a little small indie movie becoming number 1 at the box office. So it's written and directed by the Pierce brothers, Brett and Drew Pierce. Their father is actually Bart Pierce, who did special effects photography on Evil Dead, the original Evil Dead.
Interesting.
It stars John Paul Howard, Pipel Kurta. John Paul Howard and Pipel Kurta play the kids, and then the adults are played by Jameson Jones and Azzy Tesfaye. Mm-hmm. It's about a troubled teenage boy who struggles to deal with his parents' divorce and is sent to live with his dad and his new girlfriend. His life gets even tougher when he has to deal with a 1,000-year-old witch who is hiding beneath the skin of his neighbor. I thought it had excellent effects, especially for an indie movie. Mm-hmm. Intense scares, like of children eating. It shows creatures eating children. It's well directed with a great mix of practical and subtle digital effects. The digital effects are barely recognizable. They look just as organic as the practical effects. This one is another one that had interesting color correction, similar to the other one I mentioned. Its color correction is almost too light, but it looks very natural, like the other one, like straight out of the camera. Mm-hmm. But I thought this allowed for the scare sequences to be more organic and natural and it's a very natural contrast to the rest of the film. So it feels almost like a light family drama at times, but then it goes into these depths of horror. it settles into, it's really effective family drama with a sense of dread, but only because we know something's coming because of the opening scene. Has realistic character interaction, especially I like the girl that he meets. What's her? Piper Curda.
Piper Curda. Let me.
Yeah.
Piper Curda, who plays Mallory.
Yeah, she plays Mallory. She seems real, and even she's kind of overbearing and annoying at first, but overbearing and annoying like someone you just met who has a strong personality, not like an annoying character who was just put there to be annoying. She felt very real. The dad felt real. His reactions to everything that was going on felt real. The stepmom is definitely real. I love the stepmom in this. It's unexpectedly complex. The kid next door that the main character, the little kid that he bonds with, that relationship is engaging and feels real. And it's scary for many reasons. I found quite a few effective scares in this, like the boy being in the woods and seeing a hole going underneath a tree and hearing his dead mom's voice come out from it. That gave me chills. The first appearance of the creature, very well designed creature. There's this moment where the creature's kind of crawling around and you know she's there, and the boy's kind of looking around. He kind of gets glimpses of her, and then the boy sees it and it just starts to come into his view, and it's a very effective directing on this part and camera work, where the boy just starts to see the creature. It just starts to come into focus, and then his dad turns on the porch light and blinds him. I thought it was a very effective, kind of makes you jump and kind of erases the horror at the same time, kind of abruptly. It was really cool. And then all the baby monitor stuff. Because when you hear about a baby monitor in a horror film, the first thing I think is gimmick, but it never feels like a gimmick in this. It feels like a very effective layer added to the scares. It had Summer of '84 vibes, but without the retro feel, especially with My Neighbor's Evil and No One Will Believe Me. That's really where the similarities end for me. It being a young boy who's trying to tell everybody that his neighbor's evil, but nobody believes him. Similar story points come much later in the story, but the story doesn't revolve around it. You know what I mean? Like the story doesn't revolve around it being having a retro feel or anything like that. It's properly maddening for me, a genuine struggle of the main character, where I almost hate stories where the main character gets accused of something and they can't prove themselves. It's so frustrating and maddening, but in a good way.
But that's the drive for a lot of great fiction, though.
Yeah, exactly. And then because of this, the creature, it's a physical creature, so you get like a monster movie feel to it, and also like a witch movie feel to it, but it also feels very psychological, because the creature kind of plays with people's emotions, makes people forget things. So it's a psychological layer to it. All the scenes of fighting the creature are awesome. They're scary. The action is well filmed, and it further complicates the main character's situation each time. And each time he faces the creature, his story becomes more hopeless and more frustrating. This is another one, exciting and satisfying climax with a lot of action, a lot of drama, a lot of scares. And then this is another one with the epilogue. It's a great open-ended epilogue scene to end the whole thing, and kind of wraps it all up, but it also leaves you feeling like a layer of dread, like this is not over. So overall, I absolutely loved The Wretched.
Okay, so where it might get controversial, I did not like this movie. And one of the things for me is that it does give me a Summer of '84 vibe, and it has things that remind me of other horror movies or a certain kind. But for me, it has been there, done that kind of quality. And another problem I have with it is the main character. I don't think he's a particularly interesting or compelling character. It was hard for me to really care about what he was going through. And it has this, all right, and this is how what I noticed was my problem with it, is that some horror movies do genuinely scare me, some don't, but even ones that don't can give me a sense of tension, or like that sense of, like, just some doesn't mean you're necessarily scared, but you feel the tension, you feel kind of the sense of suspense. I never felt that at any point during this movie. It felt like it was just going through the motions. The most interesting thing to me was actually the character of Mallory, who I actually think brought a little bit more realism to the story. But the way that it just piled on, like, scare after scare, just didn't really add up for me. And by the end, I just felt that my pulse had not changed throughout the entire movie. And I think that was my big issue with it. I didn't find this terribly compelling.
Well, it was definitely compelling for me. It was more compelling than it was scary, for sure.
Okay.
Like, I never felt any kind of panic or anxiety in it. This is one. It would have been higher on the list if the scares would have made me feel more. I felt the story more than the scares, but I felt like, how to explain it? I felt like I liked the scare sequences. I liked the way the scares were presented to me rather than feeling scared. You know what I mean?
It's almost like appreciating it from a filmmaker's point of view, almost.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like the way the scares looked, and I like the way they felt, but it was exciting but not scary.
Okay, and to that end, and I guess that was my problem with it, is that you're right. A lot of these are very well directed scare sequences, but I think for me, I was just recognizing the mechanics behind it too much, that I never felt full. Like, there's some movies where you can recognize the mechanics behind the filmmaking and still have it affect you at the same time. This one, I only saw the tricks being played and what was being. I'm more of like an observer, like, oh, okay, I could see what they did there, and that's a cool trick, but it didn't actually hit me. And I guess that's what were my issues. That I don't expect every horror movie to scare me, because that's not a fair expectation, but I want to feel at least some sense of tension at some point, and it just didn't feel like that for me. And I kept comparing it to Summer of '84 in my head, which was a movie that I felt was very tense and very had me very on edge. And it also that is also a familiar story too. I think that's also like a familiar story. The tropes, you see something next door, kind of a Rear Window, Disturbia type of thing. You don't know, has the retro vibe. But I felt the tension through the entire movie, and I think the twists at the end of it kind of change and re-alter, take the type of horror movie it is to the next level, to take it to do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The twist. Just felt like this didn't do that enough, and maybe I was comparing it to Summer of '84 in my head way too much.
Yeah, it felt like Summer of '84 to me because of the, having an evil neighbor and nobody will believe the young boy. But other than that, there was so much established before the creature went into the neighbor. There was so much established. I just felt like that was just another part of the story, so it didn't distract me that much as far as being reminding me of Summer of '84. But one thing I did feel in it, maybe this is wrong for me to say, but it felt very white bread.
It did. I don't want to say that, but yeah.
it just felt like we were dropped in the middle of this so white bread family.
Yeah, it was.
You know what I mean?
It was that's another thing. It was highly unrelatable, and obviously, look, most movies throughout history have been about white people, and like I said, I'm not trying to get political here. That doesn't mean that I can't relate to it or that I can't be invested in the characters. I mean, if I didn't like movies with white characters, I wouldn't like very many movies. Let's just be honest. But I usually, this one was just too something that I just couldn't find any entryway into the story. Like even Summer of '84, that isn't like my neighborhood. That's not like how I grew up. However, the type of relationships you have with your friends at that age and the type of adventures that you try to get in are similar and are relatable. And I found kind of an entryway into the story through those elements, because I know what it's like to be a young boy that age and to be out with your friends, young, looking for mystery. It just couldn't connect with me.
Yeah.
So yeah. So my number 7. It's technically not a movie. It's a documentary, but it's a horror documentary on Shudder. It is Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street. And I argued with myself whether I should put this on because it's a horror documentary. And then the past couple of years when we've done these lists, I have not included horror documentaries on the list. I think I'm going to start breaking that now. I kind of wish I would have put horror noir on my list back a couple years ago. But here we are. So Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street is a documentary about Mark Patton, the star of A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, and the effect that film had on him, what it did to his career, his journey to become an actor. And it also tackles LGBTQ's complicated relationship with the horror genre and how LGBT people relate to horror in particular. For those who don't know, A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 over the years has kind of been reclaimed as a queer horror film. There was a lot of gay subtext that was written at the time. And to be quite honest, I actually think the subtext is a little bit homophobic that's in the movie. But I do think that it still survives as a queer horror film because despite some of the problematic things that I find about the story of that and what it actually means, I think it's kind of cool that there was a film like this where another type of person could relate to what was going on, to have a character who wasn't a final girl but a male and not a stereotypical male, somebody who seemed a little bit more sensitive. People could kind of always tell that there was something gay going on there, so I think it gave a lot of young people, I'd say, kind of like a hero to look up to, somebody that they could idolize in the film despite the message about gay people not being the most positive thing in the world. But I felt like this documentary explored it really great. You get to talk to the cast of the original, the director of the original Nightmare on Elm Street. You see what conventions are like. You see some of how sometimes the horror fan base can be a little bit toxic at times. Just face it, the way that they react to people, the way that they react to Jordan Peele, the way that they react to anything that's outside of the norm, and the type of homophobia that Mark Patton had to deal with that kind of drew him into hiding, how it kind of ruined his career. But it also celebrates the relationship that gay horror fans or queer horror fans have to the genre, and there's a genuine celebration in it because I think the horror genre appeals to anybody who doesn't feel like they fit in with the rest of society, the way if they feel outcast or they feel a little bit different. There's something in the horror genre that will help you connect to that. And I think this film makes a good connection between those two things while also telling a very compelling story about Mark Patton, his career, what he went through, his relationships to horror fans, horror conventions, the reassessment of the film of A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 over the years, Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. Overall, I just thought it was a superb documentary that horror fans should really treat themselves to and check out. I think there's a lot to learn from it. So yeah, that's my pick, Scream Queen, and my Nightmare on Elm Street.
That's a really cool, really interesting documentary. Really entertaining and informative about the movie and about all the behind the scenes stuff. Mm-hmm. But there's that particularly interesting part where Mark Patton had a direct problem with that writer, mm-hmm. and he almost demanded an apology. I thought that was a very effective part of that documentary. It was kind of something that rose out of the interviews that I don't think they planned for.
And the movie isn't afraid to tackle things that might make people uncomfortable. The way that they confront the writer is pretty ballsy, and it's what documentaries should do. You should try to strive for the truth because it was obviously very uncomfortable for the writer to go through that and to have to apologize. And you could tell that I believe that the apology is genuine, and you see a certain type of growth. And I think that makes the film more rewarding, that we see that just because you think a certain way or you have certain beliefs doesn't mean that you can't grow as a person or modify your views or learn more. We're all working on ourselves and we're all trying to become better people. And this is kind of a movie that shows it is possible to become a better person.
Yeah.
So I really loved it. Thought it was great.
Very interesting choice.
Yeah.
So that brings me down to my number 6. This is another one that we discussed earlier in the year. This one's on Shudder. It's Spiral. It's directed by Curtis David Harder, who actually produced Stillborn, Harpoon, and Z. He's worked a lot with the Vicious Brothers, which he teamed with as writers on this. So the Vicious Brothers wrote this movie. Colin Minahan from the Vicious Brothers, who actually wrote Grave Encounters 1 and 2, Extraterrestrial, It Stains the Sands Red, and Stillborn. And then John Poliquin, who actually directed Grave Encounters 2. So they got together and wrote this. And then I think it's because these are good writers and clever writers, but they knew that they wanted this story to be more cinematic. So I think that's why they went with the director, Curtis David Harder. It's a Canadian film. It was in festivals in 2019, released in 2020. I can't say enough about how much Jeffrey Bowyer Chapman shines in this as Malik. He was in Grave Encounters 2 and Dirty Grandpa and American Horror Story. Ari Cohen.
The horror protagonist of the year for me. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh, yes. Such an impressive performance. You feel every emotion that he has. You feel scared when he feels scared. You feel sad when he feels sad. Mm-hmm. A very compelling character and a very empathetic character where you really feel for his struggle. And then Jennifer Laporte as Kayla. Ari Cohen as his husband Aaron. He's from It Chapter 2. He played Stanley's dad. And then the creepy neighbors played by Lachlan Monroe and Chandra West. And it's the creepy neighbors that is really the thing that makes it feel like Get Out. But instead of being a copy of Get Out or being derivative of Get Out, I think it's more of just a product of Get Out. Mm-hmm. Of the kind of stories and narratives that
we can tell now.
Yeah, that it really opened up a whole new section of horror that we're really starting to explore this year, and it seems to be it's just going to get more and more.
Interesting that we go from Scream Queen and Nightmare on Elm Street on my list to this, because they're both LGBTQ horror films or queer horror films. I think that just sounds more inclusive.
Yeah, because it centers around the same-sex couple, Malik and Aaron, who moved to a small town with their daughter, and Malik starts to suspect that the neighbors have sinister intentions and dives into occult conspiracy and supernatural horror.
Yeah. I agree with you on the Get Out. I do think that some of it was inspired by Get Out, but it takes it far enough in its own direction that it kind of has its own vibe. I actually noticed a lot of like old school Roman Polanski horror thrillers influence on this. It reminded me a little bit of Rosemary's Baby. It kind of gives off that vibe. And I think what also separates this from Get Out, and people like to debate whether Get Out is a horror movie. That's bullshit. Even Jordan Peele is insulted by that. It is very much a horror movie. However, I feel with Spiral, it's harder to argue against it being a horror movie in terms of the atmosphere is more overtly dread-filled. Do you understand what I mean? Like it goes for it like a little bit more overtly, so you can't not mistake it for horror. Like I said, it is a product to Get Out, but partially just because now we are able to tell different types of stories than we're used to seeing. And like you would have never thought like 15, 20 years ago would be such. I don't know if this is very mainstream, but I guess mainstream within horror to have a horror film centered around a same-sex couple, but have it play and directed just like any horror film that would be about a straight couple going through something similar or anything like that. I really appreciate that. And Jeffrey Bowyer Chapman, most compelling horror protagonist of the year for me. I'll get more to him later, but I think he's just so likable, so easy to like. You really empathize with him a lot, and I think that's another great thing. This like Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street is very empathetic to a certain type of experience, and that's something nice to see as well. And as a horror movie, it's freaky. There are moments there are like moments that give you goosebumps. There's a couple things that are actually shocking. So if you even just remove the subtext and the social commentary from it, it's really just effective as straight horror with a kind of dread-inducing Polanski-esque atmosphere.
And it's that main character that always keeps you pulling in. It keeps you on the edge of your seat and pulling in closer to see what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
And were you just like me, where please don't let anything happen to this guy, please? Yeah. But you love him so much, and you feel what he's feeling. And the score was excellent in this. I mean, it starts out so subtle, and then it slowly gets more and more intense as it goes along. So it kind of helps ratchet up the tension just a little bit each time.
Yeah.
And then the filmmaking and the writing were both very patient and confident. You could tell that those writers and that director knew what story they wanted to tell, and they weren't going to give you any hints of what was coming up unless they wanted to. Carefully placed, you know.
It didn't feel like a slow burn to me, though it's directed like one.
And then you got the main character starts losing time, and it becomes very psychological. And this is another one where the riveting mystery, and then the mystery slowly turns supernatural, and then all of a sudden you're in the real horror, you know.
Yeah.
And the horror seems to get more intense, more dangerous, and more scary all the way up to the end.
I agree.
And then for me, this is the one I was watching the whole time, where it moves from scene to scene with these fascinating transitions. You're feeling everything. It's gory, it's unnerving, it's interesting. And then I started thinking, when the climax was coming up, that's why I started thinking, there's no way the payoff is going to be as good as that buildup, and I'll be damned if it was.
Yeah, very satisfying.
So I highly recommend watch Spiral on Shudder.
I have more to say about that on later. My number 6 is Swallow. This film actually really impressed me. It was directed by Carlo Mirabel Davis, and it is probably one of the most unnerving body horror films that I've seen, and I think largely that has to do with the nature of the body horror in this. Now, a lot of body
What's the name? What was it again?
Swallow.
Swallow. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Swallow. So it has to do with the nature of the type of body horror. The type of body horror that I'm more used to in horror movies is more of the David Cronenberg variety, something like The Fly or Videodrome, where you get the sense of your body warping to like really unnatural states, whether it's decay, or in The Fly you get the sense it's kind of a metaphor for decay and aging or AIDS or cancer or whatever. And those movies really get under your skin because they remind you of the fragility of your body. But however, movies like The Fly, which is fantastic, masterpiece, it's not exactly relatable to the average person. Most of us are not scientists that are going to be fused with The Fly. The type of body horror that exists in Swallow is very uncomfortable because it seems very plausible and realistic. This is the synopsis. Hunter, a newly pregnant housewife, finds herself increasingly compelled to consume dangerous objects. As her husband and his family tighten their control over her life, she must confront the dark secret behind her new obsession. So throughout the movie, there's a very troubled young woman who doesn't seem like she's very happy with her situation in life. It seems like she's kind of going through the motions to satisfy her fiance, who took her, comes from wealth and has a big career and a good job with a family with a lot of money. You feel like he kind of took her in, and she's just kind of there so he could take care of, so she could be taken care of by him. You also start to feel sorry for her as you see how the family treats her. They treat her childish. They try to run her life. The parents in particular are insufferable people that I just couldn't stand. I wanted to smack them. I thought they were rude, do not know how to talk to people, and have a condescending kind of elitism towards this poor girl. And you could see that she's very troubled, and you don't know the nature of what's bothering her. And I'm not going to tell you what it is because it's very crucial and it's very shocking. But there's a dark secret that she's harboring, and it kind of leads her to start doing things like swallowing sharp objects or swallowing batteries, swallowing screws, swallowing these things that go through her body, and you see her in pain. And I guess it's that type of realistic body horror where where the thought of a nail going through my digestive system actually gave me active anxiety. When I saw her consuming sharp objects and thinking of it going down her throat and ripping her inside, with the baby inside, and she's pregnant as well, sounds terrible. They even point out that swallowing a battery, that acid could open up and like bleed into your stomach. So a lot of the body horror under this was more, I don't want to say understated because that doesn't sound understated like what I'm describing, but compared to the more like fantasy-esque body horror of David Cronenberg, where you're morphing into a fly, or Videodrome, where your body is morphing into something surreal and opening up, this felt very uncomfortable in a way that was realistic. I think that the lead actress in this, Haley Bennett, gives a very compelling lead performance. You feel so sorry for her. You have a lot of empathy for her. And once she starts to take a little bit more control of her situation in her life, you really root for her. Overall, I thought this was a very engrossing film with very well-defined characters, a movie that was clear purpose, a twist that doesn't feel gimmicky, that totally enhances what it's going for, it enhances the theme of this film, and some of the most realistically uncomfortable body horror I've seen in a movie in a long time. So overall, this is a high recommendation for me. I really dug Swallow a lot. Thought it was excellent.
A lot of it makes you very uncomfortable watching it.
Can you imagine something like that going into your body? Like, the thought of it actually gives me, every time she like open her mouth and swallow something, like, no, almost like want to cover your eyes. And like, that scares me more than, like I said, I keep comparing it to The Fly, but The Fly, I like those effects. I'm like, cool.
Yeah.
I get more excited when it gets more disgusting and I start like, I love this. I'm start admiring the makeup here. I'm not admiring it. I have anxiety when I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about my own internal organs. Very unnerving stuff. Unnerving stuff.
One thing I expected to feel that I didn't feel, I thought I was going to feel like it was just this loopy chick, like what's the hell's wrong with her? But you don't feel like that. You don't feel any type of resentment towards her, even though you know that she's harming the baby. She feels very much like a victim of circumstance. Like, you know there's something there. You know there's something there why she's doing that, and it's out of her. It has to be out of her control.
You dislike the family more than her. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I love that husband character, and loved him, meaning that I hated him. But
he's a great character, but he's so fucking loathsome. And I had moments where I didn't like him, but I thought he was a little bit more likable than the parents, and I saw some kind of empathy there where I felt like he has a little bit more empathy and a little bit more understanding than his parents do, so maybe there's some hope. And by the end that you realize he is just a completely despicable piece of shit, and he's no worse than them.
What I liked about him, as well as the writing of his character, was that as it went along, you're like, this guy's kind of nice. I mean, he ignores her now and then because he's busy with, he obviously made enough money to have this lavish estate that she's living on. So he's obviously busy all the time, but you feel like there's more than that. You feel like there's something in him, but they're not giving you any hint of it, but you feel that it's there. That's what I liked about it. And so when he shows his true colors, you're like, I seen that coming, but you can't think of any particular thing that he said or did that made you feel like that was coming.
Yeah.
So just really good filmmaking.
Yeah. So yeah, Swallow, my number 6. Barely missed my top 5.
All right, and that one barely missed my top 12. It was in my top 12 until I watched Rent-A-Pal and it bumped it out.
Fair enough.
All right, now we're at our top 5. My number 5 is a Russian film. Sci-fi horror Sputnik. Directed by Igor Abramenko. And again, surprisingly, shockingly, first feature film. How the hell do you make a film this good, your first feature film? Written by Oleg Malovichko and Andrei Zolotarev. It stars Oksana, these names. It stars Oksana Akinshina, Fedor Manduruchuk, and Anton Vasilev. This excellent ensemble cast. There's not one bad actor in this. All the actors are extremely skilled, talented, believable. The synopsis is: a renowned Russian psychologist, played by Oksana, is brought in to investigate the lone survivor of a mysterious spaceship accident. The survivor's played by Vasilev, and finds out that an alien creature is hiding inside of him. Now, just by the premise, it sounds like a very simple movie, a simple story, but that could not be farther from the truth. The overall premise is simple, but once you dive into it, it's layer upon layer upon layer. They all feel real. They all feel compelling. It's dramatic. It's action packed. It even has, it's even a slow burn when it needs to be. But it all feels right. It feels like this is one of those movies that feels like a perfect movie to me. It feels like to me it felt like a polished Hollywood blockbuster with no studio interference. It's almost like a big blockbuster, big budget, but someone gave someone with a vision full reign to do what they wanted, and that's what this movie felt like to me. The score is extremely big, professional, and most of all, effective and spot on. The writing, directing, acting, practical and digital effects, all spot on. Cinematography, atmosphere, originality. Not much originality in the original premise, but the way it explores it is original. It's got great pacing, great drama, action, horror, sci-fi, creature design. Everything is just perfection in this. We open with the doomed space mission that we know about from the synopsis, and we know every character on that ship. It's one scene to open a movie with. We know every character on that ship before they meet their fate, but it remains a mystery. I was hooked. A very complex lead character that you can't take your eyes off of. The tough, smart, intense psychiatrist that comes in, played by Oksana Erickshina. She's a fascinating character to watch. It's awesome psychological aspects that come into play as the story unfolds, and it comes out in these sessions between the psychiatrist and the astronaut, the cosmonaut. And it ties the whole story to the creature, and there's twists that come up that feel natural. Great twists, but none of them felt forced. None of them felt like they came out of nowhere. They all felt like they were earned. Everything was informed by what came before it without being predictable. Great character arcs. With every single character that was on screen had great character arcs. Even some of the minor characters had great character arcs. It used psychological foundation that built throughout the sessions to fight the creature at the end. Everything that you see built through this story, through this narrative, is all used to fight the creature at the end. So everything has a purpose. Fascinating story beats, which is rare for a film that this big and this polished and this fun. Mm-hmm. And I was completely impressed with it. There's a level of that makes me love it, and it's in my top 5 because it's just flawless filmmaking. Mm-hmm. But besides that, just the effectiveness of it and the way it made me feel something, it shocked me. It had my jaw drop open quite a few times at some of the story beats, at some of the reveals. I just thought it was just a superb movie in every way. Sputnik.
I'm actually kind of surprised this is not in my top list, and it's actually my 13, and I even question myself. I find it very bizarre. I have things placed above it, the types of films that I never would, films that I usually don't go for, and this is actually more up my alley than most of the movies that actually cracked in my top 10. So I have a weird experience that the kinds of horror movies that made it into my top 12 are, a lot of them are not ones that I typically would gravitate towards too. So I don't know what it is, and I couldn't even explain it myself. But it's excellent, dude. It's well made. It's so professional looking. I know it's a low budget movie, but it doesn't give that vibe or that feel off it. I could see what you has. It has a very polished studio feel. And it's quite a bit more sophisticated than I was led to believe it was. People describe it as a creature feature or something like that. I get it has elements of that. I'm not going to say that's not an incorrect description, but I feel like that kind of shortchanges what the movie actually is. This is much more than just a creature feature, if you know what I mean. I feel like it explores things at a much deeper level. I also see a lot of strange comparisons to Alien. The only thing I could see in comparison is that it's dealing with aliens with a strong female lead, and it has a very professional look to it. But I don't even think this goes in a remotely... One, this doesn't take place in space. The nature of the beast is completely different. the nature of the symbiotic nature of it is pretty unique. I'm not used to seeing that in a movie. I'm kind of surprised that this movie didn't get a little bit more attention than it did, because it feels like a Hollywood production.
And it's amazing that it sounds so much like Alien, but it's almost nothing like it. Watch it.
I don't think that's a fair comparison. I like I said, I feel like this movie, the descriptions I've heard of this movie fail what it really is. It's better than what it's described as, and it's quite a bit more sophisticated than a lot of people are giving it credit for.
Yeah, I was totally expecting something fun and campy. I didn't expect this level of filmmaking. Wow.
That's one of the things that caught me off guard. So yeah, that's a great choice. I totally see it, and it's normally the kind of film that would make my list, but alas, I had funky choices that don't normally fit into my tastes. So here we are.
All right. So now we're getting into your top 5.
Oh, it is my top 5. Here we are. My top 5. We are now at The Invisible Man, directed by Leigh Whannell. This was the second to last movie that I saw in movie theaters before the pandemic hit in. We couldn't go anymore. I think this is a great updated reimagining of the original Invisible Man for the modern era. I know people don't like it. A lot of people have a hard time with handling it because it so ignores the precedent of what you think of as the Invisible Man in the original Universal movie. You have to overlook that this is a modern story with modern storytelling, and it is directed by Leigh Whannell, who I just get more and more respect for as time goes on. Started off writing films like Saw, and then he transitioned into a filmmaker. I think what reached his height as a filmmaker was Upgrade.
Yeah.
Like, you kind of had hints of the type of filmmaker that he would grow into, but that was the first one that I felt was like fully fledged. Okay, Leigh Whannell is no longer just a screenwriter who's making movies. He is actually a filmmaker. And I think The Invisible Man continues that streak and shows that Upgrade was not a fluke. For one, I think it has the most effective opening scene of any horror movie in 2020. Just for the fact that the way that it establishes information really quick. You don't know what's going on. You don't understand the nature of the relationship between Elizabeth Moss's character and Oliver Jackson Cohen's character. And it's completely silent. There's no dialogue. But within like 10 minutes, you get a wonderfully crafted suspense sequence that takes place in a very steely, how to describe it, kind of like a high-tech looking mansion that's all rigged up with cameras. And you see the great detail that Elizabeth Moss's character did to plot her escape from Oliver Jackson Cohen. So it's tense. You feel her when she's walking very silently, slowly getting all of her things, doing all the things to trick out the alarms and the sound system. You could tell that she worked it out. You feel tense when she trips over something and makes a little bit of noise. You feel like that tension going in. And I think that's great when you can establish that sense of tension without even having a full grounding of what the story's up to. You just purely get it just based on the visuals and what's going on. So I think right from the beginning, it establishes a very tense feel and shows that Leigh Whannell really knows how to utilize visuals. I think it has several shocking moments, particularly one shocking moment that really shook me up that takes place in a restaurant. I think it's intense. I don't think the finale is as good as the rest of the movie, although I don't think it undoes it like some people claim it does. I know a lot of people who think it completely falls apart. I don't go that far. Really tense filled, very modern. I liked it a lot. And Elizabeth Moss is a fantastic actress. She keeps proving herself again and again, and it's nice to see her tackle the horror genre again after she was in Us, the Jordan Peele film. And there's another great movie she's in called Her Smell. Definitely worth checking out. But yeah, The Invisible Man, we did discuss it on the podcast early last year. Shit, over a year ago now. Can you believe it?
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, so if you're interested in getting more in depth, go back over a year and check our podcast on The Invisible Man. But I just thought it was superb and makes me very excited for Leigh Whannell's career. It shows that he has an ability to make very original concepts, even working within the framework of a pre-existing property. He knows how to rework it in a way that feels fresh, exciting, and new. And I can see a lot of that between this and Upgrade. He has a very fresh storytelling. He has very fresh storytelling abilities.
Well, that movie was in my top 10 pretty much all year. And it got pushed out toward the end of the year for a couple reasons. One is I was so excited. I was infinitely more excited for Lee Winnell's career after seeing Upgrade. And it's a little bit of a step down after Upgrade for me. It wasn't as clever. It wasn't as original. But very effective. I mean, you can't deny how well directed it is. Great scare sequences. And another thing that kind of took it down for me is the concept. The execution of the concept felt very much like 100 Feet. You ever seen 100 Feet with Famke Janssen?
No.
This came out a few years ago. Nobody knows about it. Michael Pare plays her husband. Well, she has an abusive husband who dies, and he's able to come back from the dead and beat her some more in the afterlife.
Okay.
It felt very much like that. So it just, the more I think about it, the less original it is to me, and it's a step down from Upgrade. So that's why it went down on my list. But it's still in my honorable mention. It's still a very impressive movie. But I just want to see Lee Winnell is the kind of writer I want to see in 100% original IP. That's where he's going to shine, I think.
But don't you think that, like, I could definitely see it's not as original as Upgrade, as original of a vision, but don't you think that it proves that his filmmaking abilities are not a fluke?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, because you get that because I feel like a lot of screenwriters who do that most of their career and they transition directing don't usually do it well. He seems to have really figured it out and figured out what really makes something work cinematically, not just on the level of the script.
Yeah, and his clever writing was there again. I mean, it wasn't as edgy like in Upgrade, but you could still see how clever his writing is and how natural it is. And he has an original voice, I think.
Okay. That's my number 4.
That brings us to my number 4. Now, this one is one of 2 movies on my list that are just so me. Like, I'm not even going to say that this one and this other movie that I talk about are better than anything else. It's just so me. This one is Anything for Jackson. It's on Shudder. This one feels like a movie that I would have made. That's one of the reasons why I love it so much. It has so much my sensibilities, and everything that happens spoke to me as a horror fan and as a filmmaker. So that's why I love this one. Anything for Jackson, directed by Justin G. Dick. Again, really impressive. This is his first horror film, but he's done tons of Christmas movies and love stories. So him and the writer Keith Cooper were both partners who wrote and directed a bunch of Christmas movies and sappy love stories. I got to look into how this came about a little more, because I couldn't believe that when I looked at their IMDb's. But they worked together on all these movies, so now they did their first horror film. It stars Sheila McCarthy and Julian Richlings as who are extremely accomplished character actors who play the main couple of the film. Extremely accomplished character actors who've been in tons of movies, but nothing that you recognize. And then you put them together with Constantina Mentelos and Josh Crudis. It's about an aging Satanist couple kidnaps a pregnant woman so they can use an ancient spellbook to transfer their dead grandson's soul into the unborn baby, but end up summoning more than they bargained for. So right away, it opens a song, and you got something that's been overused in horror, which is taking a pleasant sounding, like a happy song, and adding a negative connotation to it, make it sound creepy. But it's really effective here to open the movie. Is that Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer, do. I always thought that was creepy anyway. But
it reminds me of 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah, but it's a creepy vibe, and it's creepy because of the context of the scene, and it sets the tone for the whole film that is mixed with very well-crafted scenes, mixed with horror, nerd-pleasing horror like I like. That's borderline camp, but never crosses into campy territory. Like some of the scare sequences that are presented to us, like, oh, that's almost campy, but it never reaches it. We're shocked to see what the couple are up to once we see them kidnap this girl, and we start to see how carefully they have planned this out. And we also see that the wife is the dominant one.
Mhm.
And then you start slowly going back and seeing how they prepared, how they picked their victim, everything, how they became Satanists, all that. It also carefully sets up rules. There's rules in this world, in this supernatural world. There's rules that come. This is another one. It approaches becoming too convoluted because of the borderline camp, but also never crosses that line into being convoluted, for me.
Mhm.
And it has these great lines peppered throughout, so it's really great script. Like there's this one line I kept thinking about a long time after watching it, where the mom says, "No one has more time than a grieving family. No one."
Mhm.
It really speaks to what the story is all about. It speaks to the tragedy, how it's built on tragedy. And then we see the background of why they got so desperate. Their Satanist background. And then you have a group of scares. This is where it almost got into camp because of the way the scares were set up. It's very carefully crafted scare sequences where somebody else might consider that almost too staged.
Mhm.
But for me, I've had supernatural experiences before, and I've seen demons in front of my face, and to me, it felt like I was being shown these things rather than them being the creatures. Like there was demons screaming in my face, but I didn't feel like that was a physical demon afterwards, thinking back on it. I felt like I was being shown that to scare me as much as possible. So that's why I feel about the scares in this. Very almost campy, but they're presented in a way where the supernatural force or the devil or whatever he is projecting these things onto these people just to frighten them as much as he possibly can. So you have the plague doctor creature. You have an old lady flossing her teeth until they fall out. You have a person in a ghost costume with a sheet over their head saying trick or treat at the door. That whole sequence scared the shit out of me. The contortionist that we talked about earlier, where it was in Black Box,
Mhm.
whereas the contortionist coming at him, this is the one that was a lot more effective. And the contortionist had a bag on its head, and it looked like it was bleeding and puking inside the bag. Ugh.
Mhm.
And then the repeatedly violent suicide ghost, and then the full body demon makeup. That's not only a full body demon makeup, but it's filmed in a way where it's kind of blurred out at just the right moments. It's kind of, you see kind of its profile without fully seeing it. So it's very effective. You felt like a demon was in their presence. And then we meet supporting characters and get to know them before the evil makes them do things. That's another thing that scares me in a movie, when evil starts not possessing people, but it's something different than that. It almost influences them to do things. That's always a scary concept for me. The overly nice neighbor, the cop, and a really cool part of the story came when Josh Crudis entered the story. He's one of their fellow Satanists, the pasty redheaded guy. He was creepy and funny and smart and confident. He's a really cool character. He has another layer to the story that's not only fascinating, but it's fun as well. There's another one with a great climax, but it's a great climax because it leaves you feeling with like hopeless doom. Like no one's going to escape this evil. It has consumed them. No one has any hope. Gloom and doom. Holy shit. The end. So awesome movie. Anything for Jackson. I watched it twice and loved it both times.
The scariest sequence in the movie is the trick-or-treater. I think that's the most effective. I enjoyed this movie. My only thing with this is that I actually love the script, and I think that the premise is great. And there are moments that are really effective. I just feel overall, I think I felt there was more potential for a film like this. I felt like it could have been a little bit more, like in terms of the way that it's directed. Like I said, it's a good movie, and I think the script is fantastic because it's original. But the execution didn't always get me. I think there's sections of it where it got me, but I just felt like there was more to be mined from this premise.
And that actually, you saying that actually makes me think of about another movie that's farther up on my list, which feels very much like this movie, but everything's better. Everything's fine-tuned in a better way.
Yeah, but I definitely could see why you would like it. It has a lot of potential. I think it probably has one of the best scripts of any horror movie to come out the year. That I will say that come out in 2020.
I was really impressed with Anything for Jackson. Loved it.
All right, so my number 4 is gonna be The Dark and the Wicked. Now, I kind of struggled with my placing of the film on this list because to be perfectly honest with you, I don't think it's the best film out of my top 10. But I think purely for scares, for nothing else but scares and chills and just that uncomfortable feeling that you go to horror movies to get, no movie this year was more successful than The Dark and the Wicked. It's weird because I don't think the premise is particularly original or inventive, but it's really hard for me to give a shit about any of that when it scares the fuck out of me the way that it does. The atmosphere in this movie is off the fucking charts, dude. There are so many moments where I felt uncomfortable. I felt like the hair standing up on the back of my, I could feel the hair standing up. I got goosebumps. There are moments that really shocked me. It creeped me out, really got under my skin, and I got that real sense of evil. Strangely, there is a couple of horror moments in this movie that I think are kind of predictable, but this is how I know the quality is so good that it still affected me, even though I expected to see certain things play out in a certain way, and it kind of shocked me regardless of my expectation, because I think this movie so sells its atmosphere in a way that few horror films do. Every moment is laced with this sense of tension and dread. The moments when they're going outside, when the brother goes outside to go check on the barn and he's stuck in there and he sees the things that he's seen, so purely unnerving. Like I said, I think that they're like the ones who are up on my list. I think they have more to offer in terms of an overall film, which is why I put 3 above it. But for pure terror, I don't think anything got under my skin the way that The Dark and the Wicked did, and I even struggled putting it higher. It was very difficult for me to like get it, but fuck, this movie was just purely scary. That's what it comes down to. I don't think it's like, for example, I think Anything for Jackson is a much more original script than this is. I think the concept is more original. I think it's more fresh. But the filmmaking of this so like squeezes every last drop of tension and dread that you can get out of it, that the lack of originality hardly matters because it's effective in a way that few horror films are ever this effective. This one really scared me. One of the genuine horror movies that actually scared me. And that's why it's in my top 5, The Dark and the Wicked. Pure terror from my point of view.
But it's one that, like the other ones I mentioned, where it's a similar premise we've seen, but it's the execution that's original.
Yeah. That's what sold it for me. And like I said, Anything for Jackson is actually a much more original horror film than The Dark and the Wicked is. But I just think the execution is so off the charts that it's almost impossible to ignore. Like, even if I know the mechanics and the predictable, if you keep me through the entire runtime scared shitless, give me goosebumps, shock me even when I expected, you got me, dude. You're a filmmaker.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
Really just pure scares. You got to check out The Dark and the Wicked. I believe it's on Shudder, right? Yes, it's on Shudder. Great acquisition for them. For them.
I love that one.
So what is your number 3, Mr. Michael?
My number 3, I'll just touch on this one. We discussed it on the podcast before, and you actually discussed it further down your list. Color Out of Space.
Okay.
The Richard Stanley movie. I'll just touch on it real quick. I love an H.P. Lovecraft story being told so well. I love the story of Richard Stanley coming back, and this was a triumphant comeback, despite the crap that happened after that. This is another one that takes a familiar premise of a meteor landing and starts deforming people, but it just takes it in wildly different directions. I loved all the body horror stuff. I loved how it was a mixture of real and the surreal. the boy talking to the thing in the well, the building of tension, the alpacas melding together, the mother and the son, all kinds of, a lot of great shit going on in this, from the writing to Nicolas Cage and the touching relationship between him and his wife, and there's a lot of things going on this that made me love it. So this is my number 3, Color Out of Space.
I'm only going to add one thing to that because you reminded me when I went into depth on it, I forgot to mention this element. You're talking about the alpacas and the body horror, which I did mention. I forgot to mention, I actually think this has some of the best and most inventive like creature and morphing monster type effects since The Thing. Obviously, I'm not to say it's as great as that John Carpenter masterpiece, but I think for like the creature effects, it's some of the best work, most imaginative and visually shocking work I've seen since then.
And it looks like it hurt.
Yeah, definitely.
It looked very painful. Like you could look at the characters and they're in excruciating pain.
Definitely.
So that's my number 3.
Okay. My number 3 is a film that we discussed a little bit earlier. It is Spiral. Really, it's a number of things. It's very scary, very tense, with a great atmosphere. Like I said, The Dark and the Wicked does this atmosphere even better, but there's a lot more going on in Spiral, which is why I placed it above it. I feel like the storyline was very involved. I think it creates great empathy for its lead characters. I think Jeffrey Boyer Chapman is a star. I want to see more of him. He creates a good hook for the audience. He's easy to root for. He's easy to like. I think that the social commentary and the messages are strong, and they really drive their point home without ever feeling forced or preachy. It's worthy of some of Polanski's creepiest atmosphere. The story is it's deeply engrossing. Everything that happens leads you further and further into it like a mystery. There are moments that are genuinely shocking. And one of the things I like is that there's 2 endings to this movie. The first ending is initially upsetting. The second ending is not. It's hopeful. The first ending of this movie is a little bit bleak, but I feel like the ending that they add to it is very crucial into making this feel like a more hopeful film, something that's a little bit more hopeful for the future. The way that it plays on people's fears, prejudices, the way that people react to people who are different, the way that society is, and just so many great moments. Like, I don't want to like reveal the twist or the nature of what these people do, but some of the stuff that they do at the end, and I don't want to say to which character, really had my jaw dropping to the floor that I can't believe that they actually went there. And it was very upsetting to see such a beloved character mutilated in a very disturbing, grotesque manner. And it was very shocking because the whole time you want nothing but this family to be left alone. You want them so badly to escape everything. And when you see everything coming in and kind of crushing it all, it leaves you feeling a little bit despairing and hopeless. And the ending of it just had me, at the end. But that extra positive ending, and it's not overly positive in a way that feels tacked on or cheap or anything like that. It actually enhances a lot of the themes of the movie and lets you walk out of it with a little bit more hope for the future. So I think this movie just did so many different things right, and which is why I loved it. It's original, it's involving, it's engrossing, it's well acted, the characters are likable, the atmosphere is great, there's a degree of originality to it, and it all wraps up in a very satisfying manner. Just a total standout for me in 2020 horror. Another one on Shudder. Awesome acquisitions that they had this year. So for me, it's Spiral, and I kind of feel that I feel like I'm not hearing enough about this movie. In everybody's list I look of like the best 2020 horror, I don't see it too often, and when it does appear, it's not in a prominent spot. And I think that's a shame. I think it's better than a lot of some of the more acclaimed horror movies that have come out this year.
It's definitely not getting the recognition it deserves, that's for sure.
Yeah. So please go check it out. Totally worth your time. Fascinating. Like I said, it expands the type of stories we have. A good piece of LGBTQ horror dealing with a gay couple. Atmospheric as hell. Wonderful stuff. Please check it out and support it. It's available on Shudder.
Cool. Excellent movie. All right, now we're going to come to my number 2, which I know you're going to disagree with me on because you didn't like this nearly as much as I did, is Uncle Peckerhead. This is the other movie that, besides Anything for Jackson, this is the other movie on my list that's so me. It's just my sensibility. It's things I think are funny, things that I think are sweet, things that I think are scary. It all worked for me. It's written and directed by Matthew John Lawrence. This is his first major feature. He only did one other feature film, which never got a release. I don't know why. So this is his officially his first feature. Pretty impressive for me. And David Littleton is awesome as Uncle Peckerhead. This is his first feature film. He's been in a few short films, a couple TV series. Very lower level actor. I hope he gets a lot more work after this. David Littleton as Uncle Peckerhead. Chet Siegel is very good as the main character. She's the guitar player of the punk band that's in the. This is her first starring role in a feature. And then, last but not least, Jeff Riddle as Max. This guy Max, he's got to be one of my favorite horror characters of the last 20 years. I love this guy so much. He was so original. Felt like a real person. He felt like nobody had ever seen before. He looked like he was going to be maybe a little hipster, maybe a little rock star douchey maybe, but he ends up being like a doughy, little sweet, innocent guy who just seems like so naive and he's just so lovable. I love this character. But the synopsis is a punk band struggling to make a name for themselves, score their first tour, but life on the road becomes a nightmare when they hire a roadie that turns out to be a man-eating demon. It's a perfect balance for me of horror and comedy. It leaned toward comedy more than the horror, but it all worked for me. It's an almost sweet story that would be, if it wasn't for the blood, gore, and violence, it would be a fun and quirky story. The first act is dedicated to Judy, the main character, hustling for a band, bugging a bar owner, planning their tour. She's driven, she's real, and it's also a very accurate portrayal of a struggling indie band. Because I was in a band for a while, and I used to do that same type of thing, trying to get a tour going, trying to get these bar owners to let you play at their bar, and it just very accurate on that part. Good chemistry within the band. The members of the band had great chemistry with Uncle Peckerhead. You believed them when they bonded with him. You even believed them when they still bonded with him when they noticed him killing. I mean, it's kind of a silly part of the story that they would notice him murdering people and they would still have him as their roadie, but but it was a lot of fun. The horror enters the story in a very comedic way, but it's still shocking. You feel the comedy and the horror equally for me. You got Max, the lovable character. He defies convention. A lot of the characters in here actually defy convention for me. It's not your conventional characters. It's not your conventional movie. It's not even your conventional punk rock movie. It's its own thing. There's a funny little story arc with the rival band. The rival band is ridiculous douchebags, so it's good to see this band that you love kind of mix it up with those guys. That story arc comes to a satisfying conclusion. The attack of the metal guys in the parking lot is funny, brutal. You get these, there's kind of caricatures of metalheads kind of jumping around in the parking lot being assholes, and just Uncle Peckerhead hands them a new ass. So I love how Peckerhead helps the band, has a touching bond with them, but he's evil. And it's somehow touching, dramatic, funny, and scary all at the same time. I love all the scenes of, there's some where you see the action and the gore and the horror, but there's also some really effective scenes where you see the aftermath of the kills, and then while they're trying to process this aftermath and seeing this brutal kill, you kind of have flashbacks of what the violence was like. So I like that part of it. And the ambiguous and oddly satisfying ending, this is what brought it all full circle to me. and solidified it as being an awesome movie that's going to be toward the top of my list. It's satisfying, it's dramatic and dark. I've never seen a movie quite like this. So that's why I love Uncle Peckerhead is my number 2, and it's on Amazon Prime.
Your enthusiasm for this movie and the particular type of movie it is makes me feel like I'm a cynical asshole who cannot appreciate joy. So I definitely could see how this would appeal to a lot of people, and I'm actually going to give this another chance and try to look at it a different way with a different sort of expectations. I didn't dislike the movie, and I never found it not engaging at any point. Like, I never lost my attention, and I never felt bored with it. My thing with it is that a lot of it was so quirky, and I understand that these are the characters. They're so cute, and it almost came across cutesy that the horror didn't always land for me or didn't always swell, where like the gore has really good gore effects in here. Like, this is not badly put together gore effects, but some of that quirkiness made the violence not really connect with me. Like, it felt vaguely jokey. And the characters are lovable. I get to see a lovable quality with it. It's just a lot of it just felt a little bit too jokey for my taste. And the ending, which I actually think is a really good ending, seems a little dark compared to everything that came before it. It seemed almost, I mean, I could be wrong. I need to rewatch it again, but it just seemed strange for it to arrive at that place, because yeah, I understood that Uncle Peckerhead is evil, but because the movie worked so hard to sell him as, you know, this lovable character who's evil, but he has a touching bond with the band, and it's true. You could see that he actually does care about them as people, and they kind of like him too, that it just seemed slightly out of place to me. It's a very good ending, but can you see how I might like see it that way, or like it seems slightly out of place compared to what everything that came before it?
Yeah, it seems much more gloom and doom than any other scene in the movie.
Yeah.
But I felt it coming, because throughout you see these little moments of darkness, and these little moments of evil that almost feel out of place when they happen. But it's like peppered throughout the movie. And also this bond that Uncle Peckerhead forms with the band, you see that the dynamic between them become completely different, because he's not just a demon that they scorned. He's also a friend, and he seemed to have real affection for them. So now you have a really scorned demon, and you wonder if they actually severed ties with him, if he's gone for good. And then they don't wrap it up in a nice bow. They don't show you, did he? But he probably did, you know. So that's what I liked about it. I mean, the things that you're saying that you didn't like about it were some of the things that I did like about it, like the cuteness mixed with the hardcore horror.
It worked more to me as a cute comedy or a quirky comedy than it did as a horror movie, if that makes sense. It's not that those elements are bad or that they don't have their place. It's just that it worked so hard to sell that aspect to me that the horror didn't really land to me. I felt like I was watching a cute, enjoyable, lighthearted comedy that happens to have shockingly graphic gore scenes mixed in with all of it. Although I do like the metalhead scene, and the one in the parking lot, that was something I really rooted for. But yeah, I need to give it another chance and try to watch it in a different frame of mind, I guess, from what I expected out of it.
And I thought for sure you would think that Max was as adorable as I did.
I think he's a lovable character. It's just I didn't really feel the horror of this movie for me. I think that was what it came down to. And like I said, it was never not engaging to me at any point. I never wanted to switch it off, and my patience never grew thin with it. Wasn't anything like that. It's just certain things I didn't really work for me.
Well, I will say none of the 3 band members felt like horror film characters.
Okay.
They felt like characters in a totally different type of film.
Yeah. And I guess that's what it came down to for me. So my number 2 is Impetigore, which you had at number 9, I believe it was, on your list.
Yeah.
And this is another one where this is neck and neck for terror and atmosphere with the dark and the wicked. However, I have to give this just the slight edge because it does so much more, and it does so much more with its premise. It's so much bigger, and it feels like a very satisfying film experience, if you understand what I mean. It feels like there's a whole lot of story, a whole lot of originality. And obviously, I do think that they're neck and neck in atmosphere, but if you were to go to purely on scares and atmosphere, The Dark and the Wicked would still, I think, take it at the end of the day. But this comes pretty close enough, and I found everything about the story immensely satisfying. I think I liked it because it's within 2 minutes. You get introduced to two characters that you're going to be following through the movie, people that you're rooting for, having casual conversations that are interesting. But within 2 minutes, the scenario becomes really tense, and the opening scene ends with kind of like a doozy. So right out of the gate, the first scene kind of like grabbed me and kind of like shook me. I was like, oh shit, this filmmaker did not come here to fuck around. He came here to grab my attention, to shake me up. And I need to see more films from Indonesia. I think that also helped us, the fact that I'm less familiar with the culture and that I'm less familiar with seeing films. So it had a different feel to it than most films that I've seen, even a lot of foreign horror movies that I've seen. I think that the story is so original. I think it's so well thought out. I think there's a lot of different layers to it. I think every character has a compelling storyline. The further that you go along into this and the more that you learn about each of these people makes it very satisfying. The villains don't always feel like villains, except when they do. And even then you could kind of understand where they're coming from, except for one person. The kill scenes are pretty graphic and shocking. And because it's foreign to me, like I said earlier, it has that double layer of strangeness, because they're going into a village, the two lead characters, these girls, to claim the inheritance of a house. But this village doesn't even show up on a lot of maps. Not every driver knows where it is. And they don't even seem to operate by the rules and the laws that the rest of the country seems to operate by. The village it has this sort of curse upon it where people are born without skin, and it leads to as you would imagine, it leads to an agonizing, miserable existence. And I'm not going to say the reason why, but the storyline is very satisfying. I think it's really intricate. The atmosphere is great. The violence is harsh but never gratuitous, and it feels like it fits right along with the vision. Your perception of the movie is constantly shifting as you learn more. Every character's little backstory is interesting. You mentioned earlier there's a shocking scene where a beloved character gets killed off like you don't expect. That ratchets up the tension that was already there. It's just one of those horror movies that is just, to me, firing on all cylinders, whether it's characterization, whether it's atmosphere, the cinematography, whether it's character arcs, violence, motivations, all of it. I just felt like this was such a complete package of a horror movie. You know what I mean?
And didn't it make you wonder why there wasn't more horror coming out of Indonesia?
Yeah, it does make me wonder that. In fact, I'm gonna have to check more of it out. If a lot of it, I mean, obviously it's all going to be different with different filmmakers, but you can get a similar type of atmosphere to like it, the type of given the type of locales that they use and the areas and the locations. I could totally see the country being ripe for horror films.
It feels like it came from a history of great horror.
Yeah, it does. It does. Like, it doesn't feel like it's coming from a country that's unfamiliar with horror, that's just dipping its toes into it. It's very accomplished on almost every level. The filmmaking, the script, the characters, all of it. Like, I don't really have anything negative to say about Impetigore. I'm sure there's something if I search. No movie's perfect, but it's one of those ones that just felt fully satisfying to me on absolutely every level. There's no part of it, there's no element about this movie that was lacking in any way.
And the story was so well told that in a lesser movie it would have felt like too much exposition. But in this one it just felt so natural, but they explained so much of the story and it felt organic.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't finish unfolding until the very end of the movie either. And I think that also kind of helps to reel you in as an audience member, to keep you so invested in what it's doing and what it's going for. So Impetigore, I am really looking forward to more films from Joko Anwar. Has a very original voice, has a style all his own, And obviously, he's a filmmaker in a country whose films we don't see often enough. Often enough, apparently. So yeah, Impetigore. This is another one. Actually, 3 in a row. Shudder. Shudder really their acquisitions and their original horror films between Impetigore, Spiral, The Dark and the Wicked, and there's more on here. Scream Queen, Random Acts of Violence. About 5 out of 12 of these on my list are on Shudder, and 3 of my top 5 are Shudder exclusives. I mean, some great acquisitions they got this year. Really, just great acquisitions. Love this movie. Really, I loved it. I thought it was great. And I actually saw this back to back with Swallow, which was number 6 on the list, and I was like, Swallow was so satisfying. It so got under my skin. I was like, okay, time for the next horror movie. I'm like, I was telling myself, I'm like, don't expect the next movie to be as good or as satisfying as what you just saw. Like, don't go in. I'm like, because what you saw was such a good movie. Lo and behold, when I started, I was like, holy shit, this is even better than the already fucking excellent movie I just finished watching. That was a cool experience seeing Swallow and then Impetigore to go from really good to even better like that.
Yeah, both really good movies. Look at the amount of crap that is going into horror these days, dude. Just the filmmaking talent, dude.
Yeah, lots of filmmaking talent out there.
So that finally brings me around to my number 1. This one has been mentioned already, but it affected me quite a bit more. It's The Dark and the Wicked.
I knew that was number 1.
This one, I just could not deny how it scared the living shit out of me. I mean,
scary.
The last movie I can remember scaring me like this was Hereditary, and I think it actually scared me more than Hereditary.
I could see
that's possible. Because I was so invested in this story and these characters, and that atmosphere was so effective that I found myself like, I didn't even know I had this look on my face. My daughter came down and she said, "Hey, Dad." She put her hand on my shoulder and I kind of jumped. And I turned around and looked at her, and she said it looked like I was about to cry. Like I had this like panic in my face. And she said, "What are you watching?" And she became instantly fascinated at what I was watching. What could possibly make my dad react like this? Because usually we're watching a scary movie and they jump or something, and I'm just sitting there. So, "Does nothing make you jump, Daddy? Does nothing scare you?" This movie fucking scared me.
Yeah.
It
has something in common with Hereditary, and I also say in common with The Witch. It's one of those horror movies that when you're watching it, it feels like you're actually watching something wrong.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be watching. And that's when they get really fucking scary, is when you, like with this movie, you feel like you're watching something unholy, something that you shouldn't be watching, so you should not be experiencing it. And I think that just drives it home even more. So I could see... I think Hereditary is a better movie overall because of a number of different factors, but I definitely could see this being scarier than Hereditary, or scaring people more than Hereditary does, because its atmosphere is unlike anything else I've seen in quite some time.
Yeah, and plus there was another layer of it that brought me in farther to the story, because I was raised in the Deep South. So I was raised around people who had that exact same accent. My grandma had a farm. We had a bunch of goats, and goats are a big part of this. And the mom even looked like my mom.
Interesting.
So it really immersed me in the story like no other movie has in a long time. And it's written and directed by Brian Bertino, who did The Strangers. And also Monster, which I thought was a really impressive movie from a couple of years ago. Really scaled down monster movie, really emotional, complex.
What was the first one you said?
The Strangers.
I like The Strangers. I know you don't like that as much as I do, but this is leaps and bounds ahead of what The Strangers was, like in terms of like atmosphere and terror.
Yeah, to me, this guy gets better with each film, and he took a huge jump with this one. I thought Monster was a lot better than Strangers, and I thought this was better than Monster and more effective.
Mm-hmm.
It stars Marin Ireland. She's at the center of it, the daughter of the old couple. It's Marin Ireland. She was also in 2 other movies this year. Actually, last year she was in Piercing, It's a really good modern giallo movie.
Mhm.
And then The Empty Man, which I did not get a chance to watch, but I heard it was good. So she was in 3 good horror films fairly back to back. Michael Abbott Jr. is really good as her brother, even though he has much smaller part than she does, but still very, very effective. And then Julie Oliver Touchstone as the mom. And on a secluded southern farm in rural
Oliver
South
Touchstone?
Huh?
Oliver Touchstone?
Yeah.
That's funny. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just had to I was like, what? Okay, cool.
I know, right?
I apologize. Yeah.
So, on a secluded southern farm in rural South, a man is slowly dying. As his family gathers to mourn, they begin to realize that something evil has come for him. As the darkness grows, it's clear that the evil is taking over the family. Right from the opening frame, we open on a quiet farm. It starts building tension right from the very first frame with the images and the score. And then we see that it has the atmosphere is very brooding, and it's a brooding that continues throughout the whole film and gets worse and worse as we go along, in a good way. And even when something's not there, even when it's just building the tension and nothing actually supernatural is physically there, you don't see anything there, you feel like something is there from the beginning. You feel like this menace hanging over this family from the moment they appear on screen, and you don't know quite why. I don't know if it's the mixture of the visuals and the score and everything, but you feel the dread right away, and it just builds and builds from there all the way to the end. All the howling in the woods and stuff.
Excellent sound design, eerie. Really ratchets up that tension. It feels like you could almost reach out into the atmosphere that the movie is giving off. And I keep using that word, and I know if you two had a drinking game for how many times I used atmosphere in conjunction with the dark and the wicked, but I cannot oversell the atmosphere of this movie. It's such skilled filmmaking. Every frame looks eerie. Every frame makes it eerier. The sound design that only enhances the uncomfortable feeling that the cinematography gets off. The music is uncomfortable. The way that the suspense ratchets up. Man, I'm mixing my words up, but there's some shockingly graphic scenes in here, and they're extra shocking because the way that you feel the tension just burning and building, and it's weird because the tension builds to a couple points where I thought were predictable. I knew exactly what was going to happen, but somehow I think that might have made the dread even worse because you knew it was going to happen and the movie was driving it home, and then when you saw what it was, it's probably worse than you thought it was going to be, even though you knew it was going in that direction. It's just, I don't know how to describe it. It's just pure filmmaking with this one. This is a highly controlled vision of horror.
And it's a good mixture of scares that are right there in your face that you can see developing. You can see as the sequence develops that you could feel something really scary is coming up. And then there's those scares that come out of nowhere. And this movie made me jump more than any jump scare movie I've ever seen. It made me jump more than James Wan does.
Is this a jump scare movie?
No, I mean, it's not a jump scare movie, but it made me jump out of my skin.
Okay, it did. I'd never noticed, but it does have the effect that you want jump scare movies to have, but they never actually have what this has. That I'm starting to think I did jump a few times, but they're not orchestrated in a way that you think of as a jump scare as you normally see in a horror movie. So I never even considered that element until you mentioned it right now. I had to stop and think about it. I'm like, jump scare. I'm like, wait, it did make me jump, just not in the ways that most horror movies attempt to make you jump.
You don't feel it building to any jump scares. That's why. Because James Wan is an expert at building jump scares, but you can feel it building. And you know something's going to jump out any minute, but you don't know when. With here, you're just feeling the tension. You're feeling the atmosphere. You're feeling the dread. The main jump scare I can think of is when the girl walks into the farm or into the barn reading that fucking mom's diary. And And every time they opened their mouth to read that diary, I almost wanted them to stop reading. It was scaring me so much. So I was feeling this dread and this like what's going to happen? And all of a sudden, like, I'm not going to tell you what makes you jump, but holy shit.
Yeah.
Jumped out of my skin, dudes. But the tension builds in a way where you have little subtle scares, like along with the big scares that are in your face, you have subtle scares that are along the way. Just each time you see them, they just ratchet up the tension a little bit. They're not meant to like be in your face. They don't call attention to themselves. It's one of those where you're searching the frame, like you know there's something scary there, so you're searching the frame, and then you see a little something, and man,
that moment where the girl visits the house,
yeah,
really shook me up because I think I was lulled into a sense of peace for a moment during that scene. I felt lulled into a sense of like I knew that the movie was going to pick back up. I just felt like, I felt like it almost like takes your guard down for a second and relaxes you. And when you think you're relaxed, it brings the tension back up to a worse point than it was at before.
Yeah.
There's that moment. And I don't want to describe how it goes, but it's moments like that really make this movie work so well.
And then you got these moments where they're just strategically placed, the howling in the woods, and then the goats getting restless, and then the TV, the sounds of the TV, like you're just hearing the TV playing in the background, and all of a sudden it turns demonic. Like little subtle little things like that, and then little subtle things like that lead into stuff like the carrot chopping scene. And I've seen scenes similar to that, but as far as a scene like this that plays out the way it did, it's probably the best I've ever seen as far as that goes, where you see somebody doing something, you know that they're about to hurt themselves, but you don't know when it's going to happen. Oh, man, when it happens, shit. And then that goes right into the shower scene. I'm not going to give any details, but that shower scene scared the shit out of me when the girl was in the shower. It's moody, serious, it's sad, and it might feel like it's wallowing in it, because it is. I mean, I've heard that as a complaint, that it wallows in its mood and its sadness, and yeah, it does, but it also wallows in the tension and the scariness. And because everyone in the house, every character is either sad, stressed, or depressed.
Sad, and that could be stressed, or depressed. That sounds like everybody in quarantine right now. That's America in 2020.
Exactly.
2020, 2021. Sad, stressed, and depressed.
Maybe that's why I felt so connected to it.
Yeah.
And that, like I said, everything they read out of the mom's diary, I almost wanted to stop reading, because it's like the mom explaining that the presence that is there, she just calls him a he. You don't know what it is. Is it the devil? Is it a demon? And she just says stuff like, he's killing him. He wants his soul. And I'm just getting chills right now talking about it. And then, oh man, when the brother wakes up in the middle of the night and he hears howling in the woods, and he opens up the window, and what he sees when he looks out the window, holy shit. I'm getting scared. Let me turn on the light. But so there's that one when he looks outside, and then this one it's like anything for Jackson as far as evil manipulating people's actions, and it was effective here as well. And that's another thing, like I said, is a very effective trope in some horror films for me. And then as the horror and the tension builds, the score becomes very unnerving. Like the score seems very subtle at first, and it's actually just another layer of the movie, and it almost becomes overpowering before you even realize it's there. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's kind of slowly builds, and all of a sudden it's just getting under your skin, almost the way that the Witch score does. The knitting needle scene. I loved everything about the knitting needles. Once I saw a glimpse of the knitting needles, I know they were going to be used in an awesome scene, and that one did not let me down. It has to do with the evil that's in the house. It has to do with violence and gore. It's awesome. And I also loved how previous story elements return, and they helped build in the climax. So everything you've seen previously kind of informs the climax and informs the effectiveness of it. And then the twist at the end makes the horror even more effective, and then sets up one final unexpected scare.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of it, it literally left me feeling like I get hit by a freight train in a good way. So I absolutely love The Dark and the Wicked. It was my favorite horror movie of 2020. And the main reason is just the pure visceral scares of it and the atmosphere.
Great choice. Great choice. I almost considered this at number one, but I wrestled with a lot of different factors that kept me from putting it at number one. But it's definitely worthy of that spot. It is definitely worthy of that spot, and I did love it, dude. I thought it was awesome. And now we arrive at my number one, my sure to be controversial pick, Possessor. From Brandon Cronenberg, yes, son of that Cronenberg, David Cronenberg. And I saw this movie twice, and there's quite a number of reasons why I'm putting this at number one. I also have to say this. My number one movie of last year was a movie called Loose, which was a possession horror film that doesn't feel like a possession horror film, that feels like something completely different, where I feel like most of them feel just like Exorcist ripoffs. This, too, is a deeply strange possession film that, for me, gives you the full experience of most of what I want out of a movie. Deeply original techno-possession film. I would call it a techno-possession film. That's the best way to describe it. It's not supernatural possession. It's technology-driven possession. The story of this movie is, this is the synopsis. Taisia Voss, an elite corporate assassin, uses brain implant technology to take control of other people's bodies to terminate high-profile targets. As she sinks deeper into her latest assignment, Voss becomes trapped inside a mind that threatens to obliterate her. A lot of what this tapped into is certain specific kind of fears I have, and a specific recurring nightmare that I have that I guess made this get under my skin because it seems to tap into my subconscious in a certain way. I have this recurring dream where I am somehow responsible for something heinous or horrific or for a bloody crime that I'm not sure how I got there, or I'm not sure how I committed. And I've had this dream that's gone through my head for years, and it always makes me wake up with my heart racing, and it always makes it, every time I wake up from these dreams, I usually wake up from them because they're so intense. It takes me like 15-20 minutes to calm myself down and reorient myself and put myself, you're not responsible for anything that terrific that happened. It's just your head. It's just some kind of paranoid belief. This movie taps into that really well. The main character, Voss, takes control of somebody, and when she usually takes control of the body that she's using to assassinate somebody, she has complete control and complete command over every aspect of that body. She even gets briefed on before if the person has something like irritable bowel syndrome, if they have a certain type of disease or sickness or any kind of weakness. So she's not surprised when she enters that body. For the first time, the person in who she's entering starts to fight back, and there's this kind of internal struggle. But that's not what makes this movie like scary to me. It's the idea of waking up and not knowing who you are, where you came from, why people who you think you know are dead right in front of your very eyes. Things that kind of scare the shit out of me. It's another interesting thing that I found about this. I think this is more stylized than most of David Cronenberg's movies are. I think David Cronenberg, he has a very specific style, but it's mostly because of the content that comes in his movies. It's more of like the content of his movies is disturbing. And he has a very straightforward way of filming everything, of filming all the action in it. This feels a little bit more interior. This feels like it goes deeper into the subconscious and into the brain. It taps more into a lot of those fears. And I think a lot of the violence in this movie I found very unnerving. One of the reasons I found it unnerving is because the main character is supposed to be only doing simple assassination jobs. Her job is to get out. So they ask her to shoot people just so she can just get in and get out and make it clean and efficient. And she starts doing these very brutal murders that are not called for, They're not part of her job, and she doesn't need to do them. She starts stabbing people over and over, gutting them, sticking knives in, over, like to the point where it's kind of ridiculous. There's that scene towards the end where she's a fire poker in somebody's mouth and just driving it in and having them gag on it and the blood coming out and then sticking it into the eyeballs, peeling it out. This excessive blunt force trauma that really painful, and she doesn't have to do it. And you start to wonder how much of it is actually her. She is so disconnected and so disconnected from the world that when she goes back to her normal life, before she enters her house, you see her rehearsing herself the same way that she rehearses becoming somebody else. Hi, honey, how you doing? She's practicing smiling. She's so disconnected from the life that she's actually lived and that she starts to go deeper into these fantasies. And it's kind of disturbing that while she's having sex with her husband, she's having violent fantasies. While she's kissing her kid goodnight, she's not really thinking about kissing her kid goodnight. She's thinking about brutality and murder and this feeling that you don't feel safe and you don't know who you are, and you kind of start losing yourself in this concept. And I really like the visualization of the concept. The visuals are kind of overwhelming. They're overpowering in the way they convey the sense of chaos going on inside your brain, especially when the host starts to take back over and she starts trying to push boss out. It ends up in these really horrifying moments where it keeps switching back and forth between two people. And I found it very interesting because you get a sense of dissociative identity disorder where each person is not sure who's actually committing the act. You get the sense that some of the violence is actually the host committing the violence, and some of it is actually Voss inside of her, to the point where the personalities seem to be fusing together at times as one, where they both start to share each other's memories, and it becomes a little bit confusing. Whether or not Voss is completely in on this all, whether or not part of it is him, whether or not the person had a drive or a desire for a certain type of violence that they didn't know that they were capable of, but he becomes unhinged, understandably so, as the movie goes on. But I really felt like the two personalities were kind of becoming one, where it was hard to distinguish who was who and who was actually doing what. I like the scene at the end, especially when he goes, because they start to share the same memories. He goes to the house of her husband and her child, and it ends in a very shocking scene. It has a lot of people don't like to see violence against children. So if you don't like that, then skip out on this movie because it has a particularly upsetting scene at the end of the film. When Jennifer Jason Leigh kind of takes control of the kid's body to try to get her out of there. And you sense the sense of detachment and the loss of humanity growing every time she goes inside someone else's body. Because at the beginning of the film, she's being debriefed and interviewed by the Jennifer Jason Leigh character, who I love in this movie. She doesn't like that she has a family, doesn't like that she still has connections. She thinks that it makes her a less efficient killer to have these kind of connections that Jennifer Jason Leigh doesn't have. And at the beginning of the movie, you see her talking about them trying to reorient her back to life by bringing out objects and artifacts from her own life, butterflies that she pinned to the wall. And she talks about how there's this one butterfly that she has that she said she killed when she was a kid and framed it, and she carries around this certain type of guilt inside of her. And by the end of the movie, spoilers, she doesn't have any more attachments by the end of the movie. And when she's confronted with the same type of debriefing, she doesn't seem to have any remorse for what she was doing. Like, she was always pushing to that part of herself that was completely detached from her humanity, which ultimately where the Jennifer Jason Leigh character wants her to go. And I think it's very sad that by the end you could tell that the loss of life does not affect her in a way that it would affect a normal person, and she doesn't have any kind of feeling because she's so disconnected from herself after spending so much time in other people's bodies that she's somewhat morphed into somebody who is unknowable, somebody that you can't even explain to yourself. So it's that feeling that this movie gives to you of you not knowing who you are, you not being sure of what you're capable of, being scared of what you're capable of, the type of fear that you get when you're not sure of it. There's so many different things in this movie, from the visualization to the horror scenes, the surrealism. I could see why you wouldn't like the characters because they're very detached people that don't seem to have any kind of recognizable humanity in them. But I think that's also a part of the movie. It's that sense of that loss of humanity within oneself. And as overall, it was immensely satisfying. I thought the gore scenes were brutal, shocking, and very, very hard hitting, and even a little bit cruel at times. Just to me, it was the whole package. Just a techno possession horror film that kind of makes you feel like you're watching something different than you're used to for possession films, and it's very artistic, very overwhelming. And it also, to me, would make a good double feature with his father's The Fly. And I think this is what separates David Cronenberg from Brandon Cronenberg. David Cronenberg's movies, they deal with like the deterioration of your body, and a lot of his movies make me think of things like cancer and diseases and the fragility of my own body in itself. David Cronenberg, a lot of his stuff makes me deeply uncomfortable in what he explores and how fragile your body is. Brandon, as opposed to his father David, seems more interested in the deterioration of the mind, the loss of your mind. They both tap into a different type of fear, deterioration of the body and deterioration of the mind. So I think that what his son Brandon is going for is something a little bit more psychological than what his father does, but it's rooted in the same type of fears of deterioration that comes with being a human being, that comes with aging. They both seem to have the strange fascination of losing yourself either through bodily form or losing your mind in a certain way. And even though he kind of has that in common with his father, I think he has a style that's completely different than David Cronenberg. It feels like he has developed a certain type of visual aesthetic that's much more stylized than what his father normally goes for in his movies, except with exceptions like Videodrome, or Naked Lunch, which are heavy stylized films.
But it feels a little bit like History of Violence, the feel of it, the look of it.
Yeah, I definitely could see it. But David Cronenberg has a more straightforward approach to telling a lot of these stories, if you know what I mean. It's all masterful filmmaking, but it's nothing that calls attention to itself, where I feel like Brandon Cronenberg is a little bit more of a stylist, and understandably so. I think anything that goes deeper into the mind as opposed to the body has to have a little bit more surrealism or a little bit more of a stylization to the visuals.
Yeah. Well, I watched this one twice because the first time I watched it was at the drive-in at Beyond Fest.
Mm.
And I liked it. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't going to be in my top 10. And then I seen everybody praising it. Like, it's universally being praised. Like, pretty much everybody loves this movie.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, I got to watch this again. I don't know why it's not in my top 10. It was good. It seems like it should be higher. So I watched it again, and I enjoyed it much more on the second viewing, first of all. I really enjoyed certain aspects of it, like holy shit, the brutal kills, dude. Mm-hmm. And not only the brutal kills, but the filmmaking that brings you in so close to that kill. Mm-hmm. You're right there showing the knife go in and come all the way out. You're seeing the blood spurt out. And it's never like over the top. It always pours out like you think blood would pour out when you actually stab someone. Mm-hmm. So it's like really realistic, highly polished violence that makes you feel that violence even more because of how polished it is. And it wasn't until afterwards that I thought back on it that I was disappointed, because thinking back on it, so afterwards I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it on the surface. I enjoyed the aesthetic of it, the look of it, the brutality of it, the strange Black Mirror type of story to it. Mm-hmm. I like sci-fi things like that turns possession on its head, Mm-hmm. But beyond that, I didn't like it for anything else. Like a story like this, there's a certain amount of emotion and drama that's built into it. Mm-hmm. Because you have someone going into someone's body and making them a murderer. Mm-hmm. So that's a tragedy. That's something that you should feel so much for that victim that's happening to. You should feel it. But he didn't let me get to know the victim mm-hmm. at all before he becomes her.
Mm-hmm.
So you're watching him as her. You never get to know him at all. So you never invested in what kind of guy is he? Is he a cool guy? Is he a sad guy? Is
I
he a
think that
douchebag?
actually makes it more interesting is the fact that she doesn't seem to know, especially when he has people approaching him at work and saying weird, questionable things that she would not know how to respond to because uh she doesn't really live his life. So I also feel like that choice works because it's part of being inside another personality or another body that you're not familiar with. She's kind of discovering as she goes along just by reaction, get little hints of what this guy is. I mean, you could tell that he's a party animal, probably cheats off his wife, obvious that they're both into cocaine together, and that there's some kind of resentment towards the father because he's a dickhead, he's an elitist asshole. But I felt like that was enough for what the movie was going for, especially since we're supposed to feel like we're in an alien world occupying somebody else's body. I think the fact that you don't know as much about him and only see these little hints, and just by the way that people react to him, things people say, gives it more of an even alien feel of being inside someone else, losing yourself to something that don't even have a solid grasp on.
Well, also, I'm the kind of person who doesn't think it's a valid critique when someone says that I didn't like any of the characters. I don't think it's a valid critique because you're not supposed to like the characters in every movie you watch. Sometimes you're watching detestable characters doing detestable things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I saw here, but I couldn't help but feel like there was supposed to be some emotion and there was missing. Like Brandon Cronenberg
thought
that
the detachment, not the feeling is going for. Like it has to convey a sense of detachment from oneself. And the more you play up like certain type of emotions, and I get why that might be more satisfying for your taste, but I don't think it serves the story or the themes of what this is going for. I think it would change a lot of the themes. I don't think the themes would be as effectively communicated as you had that kind of affection for the character who's the character whose body you're occupying, who's supposed to be unknowable.
It made it feel very dry to me, though. It made me feel like I was just seeing a high concept story play out. Not that, because it's not that I didn't like the characters. I didn't know them.
Mm-hmm.
And every character, what I didn't know about them was probably even worse than I imagined.
Mm-hmm.
Because the main character, she's a brutal killer who
Mm-hmm.
deliberately, sadistically kills these people, and it's never actually explained why.
Mm-hmm.
She's just extra brutal. So I'm following around an extra brutal person who doesn't really engage with anybody in any real way, and she leaps into a person that I don't know, and then it's kind of a cat and mouse thing back and forth, but it's all very story playing out, but nothing that I cared about. You know what I mean?
Okay. I get what you mean, but for me, the detachment of the characters is part of what drives it home, is part of what makes me uncomfortable with a lot of the scenes, is that sense of detachment. You understand what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
not being sure of what you did or who you are or why these atrocious acts were committed, and not having that. It feels like I'm kind of like in there with like the experience. I feel like I'm sold on the whole experience because I feel like I'm in there with her, not really sure of myself, kind of detached and feeling this kind of sense or dread. And I start to feel for both of the characters as they get kind of lost inside of not knowing who's who and who's actually carrying out what.
But let me explain it this way. For me, you're watching it, and you feel like there's something there that you're supposed to be feeling, but it doesn't make you feel that way, I guess.
Okay. But it made me feel that way, though.
Yeah, but you know how people used to accuse Kubrick of being too cold?
Or detached.
That's what I felt. I felt in that movie. It was cold. I didn't feel any kind of anything to get me.
It is a cold movie. It is a cold movie. I won't deny that it's not a warm or inviting experience. I won't deny that. And there's movies on this list that do have more emotion in it, but to me, it's for what it was going for, what it was aiming. It completely satisfied me on the level of what it was aiming for.
Definitely an impressive piece of filmmaking, all the way around.
It just makes me excited for his future as a filmmaker.
But let me tell you this. One of the things that said I wish it was more clever and why I thought Black Box was clever, once it sets up what it is, it never changes what it is. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Once you set up that she's struggling within this body, there's no kind of clever twist or any kind of clever layer to the story that's added to it. It's just that story at the beginning, and you kind of see the story play out with nothing really unexpected that pops up for me.
Okay.
But impressive piece of filmmaking. I'm nitpicking just because we're at the top of the list. That's the only reason.
Okay.
But other than that, really, really, really good movie.
So that is my number one, Possessor. For me, the most fully satisfying horror experience where I guess I tend to gravitate. I like movies that feel like a full experience, like you're experiencing something that you cannot get in another film, something otherworldly. And this, like my pick from last year, Loose, both really did the trick for me.
And just like Sputnik, I love seeing this level of filmmaking skill put into a horror film.
Definitely.
I'll always appreciate that.
Definitely. So yeah, those are our top 12 of the year instead of our top 10. It was a lot of fun putting together this list. We hope you enjoyed it. I think this is probably our most dissimilar list than in previous year. I felt like in previous years our lists lined up a lot more. I also think it's because of the more erratic releases this year. I felt like these are highly unusual picks for what I normally choose. I don't know. It's just an unusual year for horror for me. Movies like
unusual year all the way around. Yeah,
yeah, like movies like Spree making it and Sputnik not, which on a surface level I can't even argue with Sputnik being better than Spree. I can't. I guess Spree took me off of guard. I mean, they both took me off guard, but I don't know. I guess I expected nothing out of Spree, and it ended up satisfying me in ways that I didn't expect to be satisfied. So, very erratic year, unusual choices for me.
Yeah, I loved a lot of what came out this year, even beyond my honorable mentions. It just got into too many movies to mention, but there's easily I'd say 25 notable releases that I thought were really good.
Yep, definitely. So keep following us. Follow us on Instagram at Pickles Horror Show. Follow us at Facebook on Facebook, facebook.com/Pickles Horror Show. Both of those social media pages will keep you updated on everything that we're up to, whether it's the podcast, whether it's the film that Michael is currently working on, the film Pay Up that Mike directed that we're trying to get into festivals. All of that's on our Facebook and our Instagram pages. Also, we are on different platforms. We're on YouTube, so if you're watching this on YouTube, that's great. We are on Spotify, we are on Apple Podcast, and we are on SoundCloud, and pretty soon we're going to get to Anchor and other platforms. In order to follow us on any platform of your choice, go to our Flow page. Our Flow page will be in the description of this podcast like it is every single podcast. Till next week, folks, happy horror.
Horror.